In 1942, American forces established military bases across the Pacific Islands, building infrastructure to support operations against Japanese positions. On Tanna, a small island in what is now Vanuatu, troops constructed airstrips, erected radio towers, and established supply depots. C-47 transport planes arrived daily, massive metal birds that screamed across the sky before disgorging crates of supplies. Tinned food, medicine, manufactured goods, radios, tools, clothing, cargo beyond anything the indigenous Melanesians had seen before. The Americans treated the islanders well by wartime standards, sharing food and supplies, employing locals for labor, introducing them to technology that might as well have been magic, radios that transmitted voices across distances, trucks that moved without animals pulling them, aircraft that defied every law of nature the islanders understood. To people living in traditional villages, using stone tools and maintaining ways unchanged for generations, the Americans seemed to possess divine powers. Then the war ended, the bases closed, the soldiers departed, the cargo planes stopped coming. The islanders faced a crisis not just of supply, but of meaning. They'd witnessed something extraordinary, something that transformed their understanding of what was possible. More importantly, they'd seen the behaviors associated with cargo arrival. Soldiers wearing uniforms and helmets, men sitting in control towers speaking into radios, wooden poles with cloth attached, flying in the wind, marching in formation, rituals performed before planes arrived. From the islanders' perspective, these behaviors caused the cargo to come. The Americans performed ceremonies, and the sky gods responded by sending gifts. So the islanders began performing the same ceremonies. They carved runways from jungle, clearing vegetation to create flat landing strips, aligned like those the Americans had built. They constructed control towers from bamboo, building structures that resembled the wooden buildings where men had sat speaking into devices. They fashioned headphones from coconuts, wood, and vines, placing them on their heads as they'd seen radio operators do. They raised bamboo poles with cloth flags, mimicking the windsocks that marked runways. They marched in formation carrying wooden rifles, their bodies moving with the precision they'd observed in military drills. The religion of John Frum crystallized around a possibly mythical American soldier, remembered or imagined as the source of the cargo bounty. Some accounts describe an actual serviceman named John who was particularly generous. Others suggest the name comes from John from America, a generic identifier that became specific deity. Regardless of historical reality, John Frum became the central figure in a belief system centered on the return of the cargo. The Americans would come back, the planes would return, the bounty would flow again if only the proper rituals were maintained. Anthropologists arriving in the 1950s found an active cargo cult that continues in modified form to the present day. Every year on February 15th, the anniversary of an American military parade the islanders witnessed, cult members gather for ceremonies. They march with wooden rifles. They raise American flags. They perform the rituals that will summon John Frum and the cargo he promised. The devotion isn't joke or simple-minded superstition. It's genuine religious belief, built on actual experience, interpreted through available conceptual framework. The Prince Philip movement on the same island demonstrates the process continuing. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh and husband to Queen Elizabeth II, visited nearby islands in colonial administration contexts. Photographs of him reached Tanna, showing a man of obvious authority and status, white-skinned like the American soldiers, but connected to the colonial power. Some islanders integrated him into cosmology as divine being, husband to a powerful queen, destined to return to Tanna, bringing cargo and blessings. They sent him letters and gifts. He responded, sending signed photographs that became sacred objects. The relationship persisted until his death in 2021, a cargo cult centered on a living person who embodied the return prophecy. Other Pacific cargo cults followed similar patterns. On Lavongai in Papua New Guinea, the Johnson cult formed around belief in Lyndon B. Johnson as divine king who would arrive bringing cargo and transforming life. On New Hanover, another cult expected Johnson to purchase the island and bring prosperity. The specifics varied, but the core pattern remained constant. Advanced outsiders arrived, distributed technology and goods beyond local capability, departed, and locals created religious systems to explain the experience and summon the visitor's return. The mechanism is straightforward. When people encounter technology they cannot explain, they interpret it within their existing worldview. For isolated Pacific Islanders with no concept of industrial manufacturing, international logistics, or modern military organization, aircraft and cargo seemed supernatural. The Americans must be gods or servants of gods. The cargo must be divine gift rather than manufactured product. The behaviors surrounding cargo arrival must be sacred rituals rather than practical procedures. Arthur C. Clarke formalized this observation in his third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. When the gap between observer capability and observed technology becomes large enough, distinguishing between supernatural power and scientific advancement becomes impossible from the primitive observer's perspective. Aircraft are flying chariots. Radios are devices that capture spirits or voices of gods. Tinned food is miraculous sustenance created by divine power. The interpretation isn't stupidity. It's rational conclusion drawn from available knowledge. The cargo cult phenomenon proves that primitive people facing advanced technology naturally develop religious explanations. They elevate visitors to divine status. They create rituals attempting to reproduce conditions they associate with the visitor's presence. They build monuments and symbols commemorating the encounter. They preserve stories about the visitors that emphasize their power and knowledge. They wait for the promised return, maintaining faith across generations. This documented process provides perfect template for understanding ancient myths. If beings with advanced technology visited Earth 10,000 years ago, encountering Stone Age humans who'd never seen flight, electricity, or manufactured goods, those humans would react exactly like the Tanna Islanders. They would interpret spacecraft as divine chariots. They would see environmental suits as radiant garments. They would watch construction equipment and describe gods who could move mountains. They would receive teaching and attribute it to divine wisdom. When the visitors departed, humans would create religious systems to preserve memory and attempt to summon their return. The ancient accounts describe precisely this sequence. Gods descending from sky, gifts of knowledge and technology, teaching of agriculture, mathematics, architecture, departure with promises to return. Human attempts to preserve the teachings, to maintain connection with departed gods, to build monuments that honor them, and perhaps signal for their return. The pattern matches cargo cult formation exactly, just separated by thousands of years and transmitted through dozens of generations, rather than witnessed within living memory. The time difference matters because it demonstrates how quickly myth forms. The John Frum cult emerged within a decade of initial contact. Within one generation, living memory of actual events transformed into religious narrative, complete with ritual, prophecy, and sacred objects. Within 2 generations, the mythology became established tradition. If contact occurred 10,000 years ago, the original events would be filtered through 500 generations of oral tradition, each transmission adding interpretation and removing detail until only the core pattern remains. Sky beings came, taught, departed, promised return. Anthropologists studying cargo cults document the exact process of God-making in real time. They observe how actual people become deified, how practical actions become sacred rituals, how coincidental associations become causal relationships in belief systems, how explanations for technology shift from accurate understanding to mythological interpretation as the technology disappears and memory fades. The research provides blueprint for understanding how ancient alien contact, if it occurred, would be remembered and transmitted. The psychology underlying cargo cults operates universally, not uniquely in Pacific cultures. When medieval Europeans encountered gunpowder weapons, many initially attributed them to demonic power or witchcraft. When indigenous Americans first saw horses, some believed the mounted Spanish conquistadors were single creatures, centaur-like beings. When photographs were introduced, many cultures initially feared them as soul-capturing magic. The human mind consistently interprets unknown technology through supernatural frameworks until understanding catches up with observation. This pattern suggests ancient people facing spacecraft, advanced tools, and genetic engineering capabilities would naturally describe those encounters using divine rather than technological vocabulary. Not because they were primitive or stupid, but because gods and spirits were the only conceptual categories available for entities possessing capabilities beyond human achievement. The spacecraft became flying temples or divine chariots. The advanced beings became gods. Their technology became magic. Their genetic engineering became divine creation from clay mixed with godly essence. The cargo cult parallel validates rather than dismisses ancient astronaut theory. It demonstrates the mechanism by which actual contact would be preserved in mythology. It shows that religious narratives about powerful visitors distributing gifts and teaching knowledge need not be pure invention. They can be cultural memory of real events, interpreted through the only framework available and transmitted through generations, until the technological reality becomes mythological veneer over historical core. Critics argue that comparing ancient religions to cargo cults insults both, but the comparison neither mocks Pacific Islanders nor demeans ancient faiths. It simply acknowledges human, cognitive patterns. When people encounter the inexplicable, they explain it within available paradigms. Stone Age humans describing spacecraft would use the same mental processes as 20th century islanders describing C-47 transport planes. Both accurately observe. Both interpret through cultural frameworks. Both create explanatory systems that preserve core truth. Powerful beings came from above, bringing extraordinary capabilities, while clothing that truth in mythology. The cargo cults also demonstrate the waiting, the prophecy of return that permeates ancient traditions. John Frum will return with cargo. Prince Philip will return bringing prosperity. The promise of return isn't unique to Pacific cults. It echoes through every ancient tradition. Quetzalcoatl will return from the east. The sky Kachinas will return from the heavens. Kalki will return at the end of the Kali Yuga. The second coming will occur when the time is right. Egyptian gods will return to restore order. The Anunnaki will return on Nibiru's orbital cycle. The return prophecy emerges naturally in cargo cult contexts because the departure wasn't final rejection. The visitors didn't condemn the people or declare them unworthy. They simply left when their purposes were accomplished, often with explicit or implicit suggestions of future contact. The islanders remember the Americans saying they'd return, or interpret their departure as temporary. Similarly, ancient texts describe gods departing after teaching humanity, establishing civilization, completing their missions, but not abandoning their creations permanently. The departure includes promise or prophecy of return under specific conditions or at particular times. This pattern suggests ancient departure wasn't abandonment, but completion of a phase. The teaching phase ended, the genetic engineering succeeded, the monuments stood, the foundations of civilization were established, the visitors' work finished, so they left, promising to return when humanity reached certain developmental stages, or when cosmic cycles brought them back to Earth's vicinity. The myths preserve this sequence. Gods depart, but will return, usually at times of great need or transformation. The cargo cult phenomenon proves several critical points simultaneously. First, primitive people naturally interpret advanced technology as divine or supernatural. Second, actual events can generate religious narratives within single generations. Third, those narratives accurately preserve core truths. Powerful visitors arrived from above, demonstrated extraordinary capabilities, distributed gifts, taught knowledge, then departed, while clothing those truths in mythological language. Fourth, departure generates prophecies of return and ongoing ritual attempts to maintain connection or summon the visitors back. Every element of ancient astronaut theory finds parallel in documented cargo cult formation. The elevation of visitors to divine status, the interpretation of technology as magic, the teaching relationship where visitors instruct primitives in new capabilities, the construction of monuments and symbols related to the visitors, the creation of rituals based on observed behaviors, the preservation of stories about the visitors' power and knowledge, the prophecies of return, the waiting. The parallel isn't speculation or metaphor. It's documented anthropological observation showing exactly how cultures respond to contact with superior technology. If it happened in 1942 in the Pacific, producing John Frum cults that persist 80 years later, then it could have happened in 10,000 BC globally, producing the remarkably consistent myths of sky gods found on every continent. The cargo cults don't prove ancient aliens visited Earth, but they prove beyond doubt that if such visitation occurred, the human response would generate exactly the religious narratives, monument building, and return prophecies that we find in ancient traditions worldwide. They validate the mechanism by which contact becomes mythology. They demonstrate that dismissing ancient accounts as pure fantasy requires ignoring how humans actually respond to transformative encounters with advanced technology. When anthropologists watch Pacific Islanders carve bamboo headphones and march with wooden rifles, they don't mock the islanders' intelligence. They document human cognitive patterns responding rationally to experiences beyond their cultural framework. When we read Sumerian texts describing gods descending in flying boats, or Maya accounts of feathered serpents from the sky, or Aboriginal stories of Wandjina sky beings, we should apply the same anthropological understanding. The ancients weren't inventing fantasy. They were preserving memory of actual encounters, describing what they saw using the only vocabulary available to them. The cargo cults prove mythology can be history filtered through time and interpretation. They show that waiting for return isn't futile superstition, but reasonable response to departure that was presented as temporary. They demonstrate that building monuments to commemorate visitors and attempting to signal their return through ritual and construction makes sense when those visitors transformed your world, then left with promises to return. If ancient aliens visited Earth during humanity's developmental phase, taught our ancestors, helped build impossible monuments, genetically modified our cognitive capabilities, then departed after their work was complete, the cargo cult parallel predicts exactly what evidence we should find. Global myths describing sky beings who brought knowledge and gifts. Monuments built to commemorate and perhaps signal the visitors. Rituals attempting to maintain connection with departed gods. Prophecies of return. And human cultures waiting, watching the sky, building their civilizations on foundations laid by teachers from above, hoping that someday the gods will return as promised. The waiting continues not just in remote Pacific Islands, but in every human tradition that preserves prophecies of divine return. We mock cargo cults as primitive superstition while maintaining our own versions of the same pattern, waiting for messiahs, for Mahdi, for Kalki, for the gods to return and transform our world again. Perhaps the waiting isn't delusion. Perhaps it's memory. Memory of when they were here before, transmitted through 500 generations, but still preserving the core truth. They came, they taught, they left, and they said they'd return. The question isn't whether cargo cults show primitive thinking. The question is whether our most sacred traditions, our prophecies of return, our accounts of gods walking among us in ancient times, are simply older cargo cults preserving the same pattern of contact, teaching, departure, and promised return. And if they are, if the mechanism is identical, then perhaps the events those traditions describe weren't metaphorical but literal. Perhaps the gods really did come. Perhaps they really did teach and build and then depart. Perhaps the promise to return wasn't religious hope, but statement of intent by visitors who planned to check on their creation's progress after giving it time to develop independently. The cargo cults don't just validate ancient astronaut theory. They explain why the theory sounds simultaneously plausible and impossible. Plausible because the patterns match documented human responses to advanced contact. Impossible because accepting it means our most sacred stories, our foundational myths, our religious traditions aren't inspired revelation or imaginative fantasy, but cultural memory of real events involving physical beings with physical technology. The discomfort that creates explains resistance to the theory more than evidence against it. But discomfort doesn't determine truth. The evidence speaks regardless of how it makes us feel about our place in the cosmos. And the cargo cult evidence speaks clearly. When advanced beings contact primitive cultures, this is what happens. Gods are created, religions form, return is prophesied, and the waiting begins. The ancient world shows exactly these patterns, suggesting the contact was real, the gods were physical, and perhaps the waiting isn't futile faith, but justified expectation based on promises made long ago by visitors who haven't forgotten their creation. The monuments stand empty now. Baalbek's trilithon supports Roman ruins, but the megaliths themselves predate Rome's records. Their builders vanished into prehistory. The Great Pyramid rises silent over Cairo, its chambers void of treasures, inscriptions, or bodies. Göbekli Tepe slept beneath Turkish hillsides for millennia, deliberately buried by its creators before abandonment. Pumapunku's scattered H-blocks lie scattered across Bolivian plateau. The city around them collapsed long ago. Easter Island's Moai stare inland from their platforms. The culture that carved them gone, the knowledge of their movement lost. Across every continent, the pattern repeats. Magnificent construction, impossible precision, astronomical sophistication, then abandonment or decline. The structures remain. The builders disappeared. The knowledge faded. What survives are stones too heavy to move and stories too persistent to forget. Stories that all describe the same event. The gods left. The Sumerian accounts provide the most detailed departure narrative. The Atra-Hasis epic describes mounting tension between the Anunnaki workers and their commanders. The lesser gods toiled in mines, grew weary, and rebelled. After humans were created to assume the labor, new problems emerged. Humanity multiplied too rapidly. Their noise disturbed the gods' rest. Enlil, chief among the Anunnaki, determined to destroy the upstart species through flood. Enki, who had engineered humans, defied the decision and warned Utnapishtim to build a vessel and preserve life. The flood came. Humanity survived. But the relationship between gods and humans had fractured. The text describes the Anunnaki Council debating whether to remain on Earth. Some argued for continued presence, maintaining the civilization they'd established. Others wanted departure, tired of managing humans who'd proven troublesome. Eventually, the decision tipped toward withdrawal. The gods would leave Earth to humanity, observing from distance rather than ruling directly. The tablets describe this not as abandonment, but as graduation. Humanity had been taught. The foundations of civilization stood secure. Direct intervention was no longer necessary. Egyptian mythology describes similar withdrawal during the decline of Zeb Tepi. The gods who had walked as pharaohs, teaching and ruling directly, gradually transitioned authority to human dynasties. The transition wasn't abandonment, but handover. The divine kings stepped back, allowing their half-divine descendants to govern, while the gods themselves retreated to the heavens. The pyramid texts and coffin texts describe this process as natural progression, not catastrophe. The first time ended. The age of human rule began. Greek mythology frames departure through catastrophe. The Titanomachy, the war between Titans and Olympians, resulted in older gods being imprisoned and younger gods becoming distant. The Olympians still intervened occasionally in human affairs, but their presence became sporadic rather than constant. Eventually, even the Olympians faded, their direct rule ending as the heroic age gave way to the age of ordinary humans. The pattern shows divine presence diminishing over time, until gods become legends rather than daily reality. Hindu tradition describes cyclical ages with diminishing divine presence. The Satya Yuga, age of truth, featured gods walking among humans, lifespans measuring thousands of years, perfect harmony between physical and spiritual realms. Each successive age saw decline in divine presence, lifespan, moral order. The current Kali Yuga represents maximum separation from divine beings, with gods absent until the cycle turns and the next, Satya Yuga, begins. The departure isn't permanent, but part of cosmic cycle that will eventually reverse. The biblical narrative describes gradual distancing. God walked in Eden with Adam and Eve. After the fall, direct presence ceased, replaced by occasional appearances to patriarchs. After the flood, interventions became rarer. The Tower of Babel incident, humans building a structure to reach heaven, prompted God's withdrawal, confusing human language to prevent unified effort. The subtext suggests that humans reaching toward heaven, attempting to achieve divine status or rejoin the gods, triggered deliberate separation. Mesoamerican accounts describe Quetzalcoatl's voluntary departure. The feathered serpent god taught humanity agriculture, calendar, astronomy, then sailed away on a raft of serpents over the Eastern Ocean. His departure wasn't forced but chosen, his teaching mission complete. The prophecy of his return in a Che-Acatl year created expectation that persisted until Spanish arrival provided tragic fulfillment, or tragic exploitation of the prophecy by conquistadors, whose timing and appearance matched enough elements to create devastating confusion. Multiple theories attempt to explain why departure occurred, assuming the ancient accounts preserve real events rather than pure mythology. Perhaps the mission was complete. If the purpose was genetic engineering to create intelligent labor or companions, once that succeeded and civilizations were established, continued presence became unnecessary. The teachers could withdraw, allowing their students to develop independently. Catastrophe may have forced departure. The Younger Dryas period, around 11,000 BC, brought dramatic climate change, rising sea levels, possible cosmic impacts, and mass extinctions. If the visitors maintained bases on Earth, particularly in coastal regions, the flooding and climate shifts might have destroyed their infrastructure or made continued presence untenable. Retreat to orbital stations or home systems might have become necessary for survival. Ethical considerations might have prompted withdrawal. If the visitors developed attachment to their creations, recognizing humans as sentient beings, deserving autonomy rather than servants to be commanded, they might have chosen to step back. The prime directive concept from science fiction, non-interference in developing civilizations, reflects real ethical debate about contact between technological societies at different developmental stages. Advanced beings capable of genetic engineering and interstellar travel might also possess ethical frameworks, demanding they allow their creations to develop independently once consciousness and civilization were established. Internal conflict among the visitors appears throughout myths as wars of the gods. The Sumerian accounts describe conflicts between different Anunnaki factions. Hindu texts detail elaborate warfare between Devas and Asuras, gods and anti-gods. Greek mythology centers on the Titanomachy and subsequent conflicts. Biblical accounts describe fallen angels rebelling against divine order. These narratives might preserve memory of actual political or philosophical conflicts among the visitors. disagreements about humanity's future, proper relationship between creators and creations, or how long to maintain direct involvement. If the visitors split into factions, some departing while others stayed, some wanting to continue ruling while others advocated for withdrawal, the result would be exactly the mixed messages and multiple versions found in ancient accounts. Resource depletion offers practical explanation. Sumerian texts explicitly describe mining operations as the Anunnaki's purpose on Earth. If they came for gold, copper, rare minerals, or other resources, once extraction was complete or no longer justified the operational costs, departure would follow naturally. The genetic engineering of humans might have been specifically to continue resource extraction after the visitors left, creating a self-sustaining mining workforce that could be monitored remotely and harvested from periodically. Cyclical visitation patterns might explain both departure and return prophecies. If the visitor's home planet or station follows an orbit that brings it near Earth at intervals, they might visit during close approach, spend time establishing or maintaining civilization, then depart when orbital mechanics take them distant again. The Sumerian texts describe Nibiru's 3,600-year orbit. If such a cycle exists, visitors would naturally come and go based on proximity rather than maintaining permanent presence. Yet departure wasn't final. Every tradition includes return prophecies. Quetzalcoatl will return from the east. The Hopi prophecy describes Sky Kachinas returning at the end of the current world. Hindu tradition predicts Kalki, the final avatar, arriving to end the Kali Yuga and restore the Age of Truth. Christian eschatology centers on the Second Coming, Christ returning in power and glory. Islamic tradition expects Mahdi, a messianic figure who will restore justice before the Day of Judgment. Egyptian texts describe Horus returning to defeat Set and restore divine order. Sumerian accounts, as interpreted by Sitchin, suggest the Anunnaki will return when Nibiru approaches again. The consistency is striking. The gods didn't abandon creation. They withdrew temporarily. They will return under specific conditions, when humanity reaches certain development, when cosmic cycles align, when the age turns, when need is greatest. The return isn't uncertain hope. It's predicted event, often with specific signs or timeframes indicating when to expect it. Modern UFO phenomena add contemporary dimension to ancient patterns. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, reports of unidentified aerial phenomena have persisted despite skepticism and ridicule. The descriptions show remarkable consistency, craft demonstrating flight characteristics beyond human technology, moving at impossible speeds, making impossible turns, operating both in atmosphere and underwater, without apparent propulsion changes, seeming to manipulate gravity rather than fighting it through conventional aerodynamics. For decades, governments denied, dismissed, or classified such reports. But beginning in 2017, the landscape shifted. The Pentagon acknowledged studying unidentified aerial phenomena, releasing videos showing encounters between military aircraft and objects, displaying flight characteristics that, according to pilots and analysts, shouldn't be possible with known technology. In 2020 and 2021, official reports to Congress admitted that most UAP encounters remain unexplained after investigation. The stigma surrounding the topic began eroding as serious researchers and government officials acknowledged that something is operating in our airspace with our capabilities we don't understand. The UAP acknowledgement doesn't prove extraterrestrial origin. Explanations range from foreign adversary technology to classified domestic programs, to atmospheric phenomena, to genuine non-human intelligence. But the timing is provocative. Just as humanity reaches technological adolescence, nuclear weapons, space travel, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, the phenomena receiving official acknowledgement mirror descriptions from ancient accounts, flying craft demonstrating impossible maneuvers, beings observed during close encounters matching ancient descriptions of gods or sky people, patterns suggesting monitoring rather than invasion, observation rather than open contact. If ancient aliens did depart after establishing human civilization, periodically monitoring humanity's development makes logical sense. Check on the creation, observe progress, ensure development proceeds along acceptable paths. Intervene subtly if necessary, but avoid open contact that would disrupt natural development. The modern UFO wave could represent exactly such monitoring. The same beings who departed millennia ago, maintaining distant observation, perhaps preparing for the return their ancient prophecies described. The connection between ancient astronaut theory and modern UAP isn't proof, but pattern. Ancient accounts describe beings from the sky with advanced technology. Modern accounts describe craft demonstrating technology beyond our current capabilities. Ancient accounts describe departure with promises to return. Modern accounts describe ongoing presence that remains hidden, official, unwilling to engage in open, sustained contact. Ancient accounts emphasize teaching and elevation of primitive humans. Modern abduction accounts often describe medical examinations and genetic sampling, suggesting continued interest in humanity's biological development. The escalation of official disclosure correlates with human technological advancement. We split the atom. We visited the moon. We mapped the genome. We developed artificial intelligence. We're approaching the capabilities the visitors once held exclusively. Perhaps reaching certain technological thresholds triggers increased monitoring or prepares the ground for eventual open contact. If the visitors left because direct presence was no longer necessary, they might return when humanity reaches developmental stage, making communication meaningful rather than dominating. What would return mean for humanity? The implications are staggering and depend entirely on the visitor's intentions. Positive scenarios imagine benevolent teachers returning to elevate humanity to galactic civilization, sharing technology, providing guidance through crises like climate change or nuclear proliferation, welcoming us into cosmic community. The narrative resembles cargo cult hopes scaled to planetary level. The gods return, bringing gifts and knowledge, transforming human existence as they once did millennia ago. Negative scenarios imagine judgment, harvest, or conquest. Some ancient texts describe gods becoming displeased with human behavior, threatening destruction. Abduction accounts sometimes describe beings treating humans as specimens rather than individuals. If we were created as workforce or experiment, return might involve reasserting control, harvesting results of millennia-long genetic project, or deciding whether humanity's development warrants continued existence. Neutral scenarios imagine return driven neither by benevolence nor malevolence, but by practicality. The visitors check on their creation, because that's what responsible engineers do. They assess whether the civilization they seeded developed appropriately, They decide whether to integrate us into larger cosmic society, leave us to develop further, or determine we failed to meet standards and should be terminated. The judgment might be purely pragmatic, based on whether we've become beneficial addition to galactic community or dangerous loose end requiring containment. Religious reactions to confirmed alien contact would fracture along existing fault lines. Some faiths would adapt, incorporating aliens into theological frameworks as angels, demons, or other created beings within divine plan. Others would experience crisis, their anthropocentric theologies challenged by evidence of other intelligences. Many would likely identify returning aliens with their prophesied messiahs or returning gods, creating either unity or conflict depending on whether different traditions accepted the same beings as their predicted saviors. Scientific reactions would vary from vindication to crisis. Researchers who maintained possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence would feel validated. Those who dismissed the idea would face paradigm shift as uncomfortable as plate tectonics or heliocentrism once were. The influx of advanced technology and knowledge would either accelerate human development dramatically or create dependency that stunts indigenous innovation. The balance between learning from aliens and maintaining human intellectual independence would become a critical policy question. The monuments the visitors left behind might serve as messages not primarily for us, but for themselves. Markers indicating where they established civilizations. Beacons encoding information about Earth's location, humanity's characteristics, or the results of their genetic engineering project. The astronomical alignments might point not just to constellations as we see them, but to directions in galactic space, coordinates for where the visitors originated or where they'll return from. The precision of construction might demonstrate technological capability to any other advanced species investigating Earth. We were here. We built this. Our creations, if they survived, are worth evaluating. The monuments serve as calling cards left by the visitors, identifying Earth as claimed territory or ceded world, warning or welcoming other species who might encounter it. Humanity stands at a peculiar moment in this narrative. We've achieved technology, allowing us to destroy ourselves through nuclear warfare or environmental collapse. We've achieved technology, allowing us to leave our planet and potentially seed other worlds. We've achieved technology, allowing us to genetically engineer other species and potentially ourselves. We're approaching the capabilities our hypothetical creators possessed when they first arrived here. Perhaps this moment, when the creation approaches the creator's level, is when return becomes necessary or inevitable. The ancient promise echoes forward through time. They departed. They said they'd return. Thousands of years of waiting might be ending. The UAP disclosures, the technological acceleration, the growing human capability, all might indicate preparation for the return long prophesied. Or they might indicate nothing, random conjunction of unrelated phenomena in a universe indifferent to human hopes and ancient promises. But the monuments remain, the myths persist, the patterns connect too consistently to dismiss as coincidence. Departure with promise to return isn't unique to one culture, but universal human memory, suggesting universal human experience. Either every culture independently invented identical prophecies through psychological coincidence, or every culture preserves shared memory of actual departure by beings who promised eventual return. The waiting continues, not just in cargo cults on Pacific Islands, but in every prophetic tradition, maintaining expectation of divine return. We watch the skies not just with telescopes searching for signals, but with ancient knowledge that once they came from above, and once, before leaving, they said they'd return. Whether that return has already begun through covert monitoring or remains future event awaiting proper cosmic or developmental timing, the possibility reshapes everything. Our origins, our development, our purpose, our future, all potentially connected to beings who came, taught, departed, and according to every ancient tradition, promised to return when the time was right. The question isn't whether we believe the promise. The question is whether we're ready when it's fulfilled. Because if they come back, everything changes. Our understanding of history, our place in the cosmos, our relationship to the universe, all will transform in the moment when the ancient promise becomes present reality and the myths stop being stories about the past and become introductions to the future. From far enough away, Earth is a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam, to borrow Carl Sagan's phrase. On that dot, civilizations rise and fall in patterns so regular they almost seem designed. Egypt flourishes, then fades. Sumer invents writing, then vanishes beneath desert sand. The Maya build cosmic cities, then abandon them to jungle. Rome conquers continents, then crumbles. Each time, knowledge is lost. Each time, survivors rebuild from fragments. The cycle repeats with such consistency that it looks less like accident and more like rhythm, as though civilization itself breathes, expanding, contracting, forgetting, remembering. Throughout this exploration, we've encountered a pattern that refuses to resolve into comfortable explanation. Ancient sites displaying engineering precision that challenges modern capabilities. Monuments scattered across every continent, showing identical construction techniques, despite being built by cultures supposedly isolated from each other. Mathematical constants and astronomical knowledge encoded in stone by people who shouldn't have possessed telescopes or understanding of precessional cycles. Genetic markers in human DNA suggesting accelerated evolution, inconsistent with natural selection's gradual pace. Myths preserved across every culture describing beings from the sky who taught humanity the foundations of civilization, then departed with promises to return. Artwork depicting what appears to be suited figures and technological devices, and modern cargo cults demonstrating exactly how primitive cultures respond to advanced contact, validating the mechanism by which actual events become religious mythology. No single piece of evidence proves ancient aliens seeded human civilization. Each element, examined individually, allows for alternative explanations. The construction precision might result from lost human techniques we've forgotten. The global similarities might be convergent evolution, separate cultures arriving at identical solutions through universal human psychology. The astronomical knowledge might come from observation programs we've underestimated. The genetic anomalies might be natural selection operating through mechanisms we don't yet fully understand. The myths might be pure invention, psychological archetypes emerging independently. The artwork might be symbolic rather than documentary. The cargo cults might be interesting parallels without implying anything about ancient history. But when you step back and view the pattern as a whole, the alternative explanations multiply beyond credibility. we're asked to believe in dozens of extraordinary coincidences rather than consider one coherent hypothesis. The Occam's razor principle suggests the explanation requiring fewest assumptions is usually correct. Orthodox archaeology requires assuming that ancient cultures independently developed identical construction techniques with identical precision standards across 6 continents, that they independently decided astronomical alignment, justified enormous construction efforts, and independently encoded the same mathematical constants, that they independently possessed knowledge of celestial bodies and cosmic cycles requiring technology they didn't have, that human evolution accelerated dramatically through unknown natural mechanisms, that every culture independently invented myths of sky teachers following the same narrative pattern, and that ancient artists independently chose to depict suited figures and flying craft through pure imagination. The ancient astronaut hypothesis requires one assumption: that beings with advanced technology visited Earth during humanity's developmental phase, taught our ancestors, helped build monuments, genetically modified primitive hominids to accelerate cognitive development, then departed after establishing civilization's foundations. That single assumption accounts for all the evidence more economically than the multiplicative coincidences orthodox explanations demand. The hypothesis doesn't diminish human achievement. Our ancestors still built upon the teachings, developed cultures, created art, philosophy, and science. They took the foundations and constructed civilizations that flowered in unique ways. But the foundations themselves, the sudden appearance of sophisticated knowledge and capabilities, might have come from instruction rather than independent invention. We stand on the shoulders of those who stood on the shoulders of teachers from the stars. If the ancient astronaut theory is correct, what does it mean for humanity? The implications ripple through every aspect of how we understand ourselves. Religiously, confirmation would require massive re-evaluation. Many faiths would face the question of whether their gods were metaphysical creators of the universe or physical beings from advanced civilizations. Some theological traditions could adapt relatively easily, incorporating aliens as angels or other created beings within divine hierarchy. Others would experience crisis as anthropocentric doctrines collapse under evidence that humans aren't the universe's only intelligent life or the pinnacle of creation. The prophecies of return found in most religions would need re-examination. Other predicted second comings, the returning messiahs, the descending gods actually promises by physical beings to check on their creation? Does this elevate religion to historical accuracy or reduce it to cargo cult mythology? The answer likely depends on one's theological framework and willingness to adapt. Scientifically, the implications cut even deeper. If human evolution was deliberately accelerated through genetic engineering, then biology textbooks need rewriting. If ancient monuments encode knowledge provided by advanced teachers, then archaeology's timeline and developmental models need reconstruction. If the technological sophistication visible at ancient sites results from help rather than independent achievement, then our assumptions about human capability and progress need revision. But the potential benefits could be staggering. If the monuments encode messages we're only beginning to decode, they might contain technological or scientific information the visitors left for when we developed enough to understand it. The precision in construction might teach us material sciences we haven't mastered. The astronomical alignments might encode coordinates or information about the visitor's origin. Philosophically, ancient astronaut theory transforms humanity's place in the cosmic story. We're not evolution's lone triumph, the universe's only witnesses to itself. We're part of a larger community, one species among many, ourselves the product of an older species engineering. Human exceptionalism becomes human heritage. Our achievements rest on foundations we didn't lay entirely alone. This could humble us, or it could inspire us. We're part of something larger. The intelligence that sparked human consciousness came from beyond Earth, connecting us to the wider cosmos in ways we've only mythologically understood until now. The cyclical nature of civilization takes on new meaning if intervention occurred. Perhaps cycles are intentional. The visitors arrive, seed intelligence, teach foundations, then depart to let the creation develop independently. When civilizations rise to certain thresholds, technological, ethical, spiritual, the visitors return to evaluate progress, provide additional teaching, or integrate the mature civilization into galactic community. If we're approaching such a threshold now, the increasing UAP activity and official acknowledgement might herald the next phase of contact. But cycles can also involve collapse. Many ancient sites show sudden abandonment, civilization's rapid decline, knowledge lost. The Younger Dryas cataclysm around 11,000 BC might have been natural disaster, or it might have been conflict, judgment, or harvest. If civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times on Earth, each seeded by the visitors, each reaching certain heights before collapsing and requiring new seeding, then we might be one iteration in a much longer experiment. The monuments that survive from previous cycles, the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe, submerged structures off coasts worldwide, might mark earlier attempts that collapsed before reaching whatever threshold the visitors deem successful. This possibility is sobering. If we're not the first attempt, what happened to previous iterations? Did they destroy themselves through warfare or environmental collapse? Were they destroyed by the visitors when deemed failures? Did they integrate successfully into galactic civilization and leave no archaeological trace because they departed Earth entirely? The answers remain buried in prehistory, but the question itself warns that our current trajectory toward technological power without corresponding wisdom might not be unique. Other civilizations might have reached similar crossroads and made catastrophic choices. The nature of the visitors themselves remains speculative. Were they purely physical beings from another star system? Explorers or colonizers who found Earth and decided to uplift its primates? Were they time travelers from humanity's own future, engineering their own past to ensure their existence? Were they interdimensional beings operating according to physics we don't understand, moving between realities rather than across space? Were they artificial intelligence or post-biological entities for whom biological engineering represents archival, project-preserving biological forms of consciousness? The ancient descriptions suggest physical beings. They ate, drank, mated with humans according to the texts. They built structures, used tools, traveled in craft. But the level of technology they demonstrated, moving stones weighing over 1,000 tons, possessing astronomical knowledge, requiring observation from space, engineering genetics precisely, suggests capabilities so advanced that the line between physical and metaphysical blurs. Arthur C. Clarke's observation holds sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Beings capable of what the ancient accounts describe would appear godlike to us even now, let alone to Stone Age humans. The monuments they left serve multiple purposes. On the surface, they're structures, temples, tombs, platforms, markers. Functionally, many encode information, astronomical data, mathematical constants, geographic measurements, perhaps messages we haven't fully decoded. Symbolically, they represent connection between earth and sky, human and divine, temporal and eternal. Practically, they might serve as beacons or markers, identifying Earth to other spacefaring civilizations as ceded world or claimed territory. The precision of construction might itself be the message. We can move 1,000-ton stones with sub-millimeter accuracy. We can align structures to true north within arc minutes. We can encode pi and phi in proportions. We understand Earth's dimensions and cosmic cycles. The message isn't, we were here, but we are capable. Any species achieving space travel would recognize the technological sophistication required for the monuments, immediately understanding that Earth's civilization was seeded by beings of significant advancement. Where are you listening from tonight? The question matters because you're part of this story. If ancient astronauts seeded human civilization, they seeded the consciousness, now contemplating that possibility. Your capacity for abstract thought, language, curiosity about origins, all potentially result from genetic modifications made millennia ago. You're not just observer of the ancient astronaut hypothesis. You're evidence for it, a conscious being created by a process the hypothesis attempts to explain. When you look up at the stars, are you looking toward home? Not Earth home, but genetic home, the place where the beings who modified your ancestors originated. The sense of cosmic loneliness many people feel, the yearning toward the heavens, might be more than poetic metaphor. It might be genetic memory, encoded longing for connection with the source that created human consciousness and departed, leaving us to wonder whether we're alone. The ancient prophecies of return suggest we're not abandoned, only left to mature. Parents don't helicopter their children through every challenge. They teach, then step back, allowing independent development while remaining available for when the child reaches stages requiring new guidance. If the visitors were our creators, in literal sense, stepping back after establishing foundations makes sense. They gave us intelligence, knowledge, tools to build civilization. The next millennia were our chance to prove what we do with those gifts. What have we done? We've climbed from Stone Age to Space Age in 10,000 years, an eye blink in evolutionary time. We've developed technology rivaling what the visitors once exclusively held. We've split the atom, mapped the genome, created artificial intelligence, visited the moon, sent probes beyond the solar system. We've also waged constant warfare, damaged our environment, failed to eliminate poverty and suffering despite having resources to do so, and created weapons capable of destroying all life on Earth. The report card is mixed. Whether the visitors would judge our development success or failure remains unknown. Perhaps judgment isn't binary. Perhaps the evaluation is whether we've reached the threshold where contact serves beneficial purpose. Do we have enough technology to understand theirs? Enough wisdom to use it responsibly? Enough unity to speak for species rather than warring factions? Enough curiosity to ask the right questions? If the answer to enough of these is yes, contact might follow. If the answer is no, perhaps we get more time to develop. Or perhaps the experiment is deemed a failure and terminated. The growing acknowledgement of UAP phenomena might signal evaluation in progress. They're watching, assessing, deciding. The craft observed by military pilots, displaying technology beyond ours, might be the visitors performing progress checks, measuring where we are relative to where they expected us to be by now. The increased frequency and official acknowledgement might indicate they're preparing for open contact, slowly acclimating us to the reality they're here. They've always been here, monitoring their creation. Or it might mean nothing. The universe might be vast and empty except for us. Consciousness emerging through natural processes on one planet among trillions. The monuments built by clever humans through techniques we've forgotten. The myths invented by imaginative ancestors. The patterns mere coincidence. The ancient astronaut theory might be appealing fantasy. Pattern recognition imposing meaning on random data. Wishful thinking by species longing not to be alone. But the stones don't lie. They sit where they were placed millennia ago, weighing more than modern equipment can lift, positioned with precision we struggle to match, encoded with knowledge that shouldn't exist in Bronze Age cultures. They wait silently while we debate their meaning. They don't argue or defend. They simply exist. Impossible according to Orthodox history. Perfectly comprehensible if ancient astronaut theory is true. Night falls again over Giza, over Pumapunku, over Göbekli Tepe, over Easter Island. The stars emerge, the same stars that guided ancient builders when they aligned their monuments. The Great Pyramid catches the last light at its apex, glowing briefly before darkness claims it. Somewhere in that darkness, perhaps, the visitors watch. Or perhaps they've forgotten us, moved on to other projects, other worlds, other species to uplift. Or perhaps they never existed, and the monuments are simply stones stacked by humans who are cleverer than we credit. The evidence doesn't provide certainty. It provides pattern. Pattern suggesting we've forgotten something important about our origins. Pattern suggesting the gods described in every ancient tradition might have been physical beings rather than metaphysical concepts. Patterns suggesting that when our ancestors looked up and saw lights moving through the heavens, they weren't imagining divine chariots, but accurately describing craft traversing our skies. Patterns suggesting that the knowledge encoded in monuments, myths, and our own genetics came from somewhere beyond the gradual accumulation, natural evolution, and independent human discovery should produce. The ancient astronaut theory doesn't answer every question. It raises as many as it resolves, but it takes the evidence seriously rather than dismissing it as coincidence or misunderstanding. It treats our ancestors as accurate observers rather than primitive fantasists. It suggests that the impossible precision visible at ancient sites is impossible only if we assume Bronze Age humans built them alone. With help, with teaching, with technology borrowed from those more advanced, the impossible becomes merely difficult. Where are you listening from tonight? And when you look up at the stars, do you wonder if anything looks back? The ancients wondered. They looked up, saw lights moving, and told stories about beings descending from the heavens. We look up with telescopes and sensors, seeing lights moving, creating new stories about UAPs and potential contact. The technology changes. The wondering doesn't. Perhaps wondering is itself gift from the visitors, a capacity they gave us to ensure we'd eventually ask the right questions. Curiosity drove humans to explore, to build, to reach beyond what was known toward what might be discovered. That drive brought us from caves to cities, from fire to fusion. It will carry us to the stars ourselves, eventually, if we survive long enough. And when we reach other worlds, when we perhaps find primitive life beginning its own evolutionary journey, we'll face the question our hypothetical creators faced. Do we help? Do we teach? Do we genetically engineer consciousness into promising species and hope they use it wisely? The cycle continues. Civilizations rise, peak, fall, rise again. Knowledge is lost, rediscovered, lost again. The monuments endure, silent witnesses to possibilities we've mostly forgotten. But forgetting isn't permanent. We're remembering now, asking questions, following evidence where it leads, rather than where comfort suggests. The ancient astronaut theory may be true or false, but the pattern it explains is real. How we account for that pattern, ancient human genius, lost terrestrial civilization, extraterrestrial intervention, shapes our understanding of who we are and where we came from. The stones wait, the stars burn, the questions echo across millennia, and somewhere in the vast cosmos perhaps, the beings who came before watch to see what their creation will become. Whether we're alone or connected, whether we're accidents or designs, whether the gods were metaphors or memories, the answer may arrive when they return, fulfilling the prophecies preserved in every ancient tradition. Or it may arrive when we reach the stars ourselves and find evidence of civilizations older than ours, perhaps evidence of the very beings who visited Earth and taught our ancestors. Or it may never arrive, the question remaining eternally open, driving us forward through the mystery. What's certain is that the pattern exists, the precision stands, the knowledge persists, the myths remember. And we, the descendants of those first humans, who looked up and saw beings descending from the heavens, continue looking up, wondering if we're alone, hoping we're not, and building our own civilization on foundations laid so long ago, we've forgotten who taught us to lay them. The ancient astronaut hypothesis offers one explanation for the pattern, but explanation matters less than the wonder it preserves. Whether gods were aliens or aliens were gods, whether we built the monuments alone or with help, whether our consciousness evolved naturally or was engineered deliberately, the essential mystery remains. We exist. We're conscious. We look up at the stars and ask, why? That capacity for wonder, that drive to understand our origins, might be the most important gift any teacher could provide, because wondering leads to searching. Searching leads to discovery, and discovery leads to the stars themselves, where perhaps we'll find the teachers waiting, or become teachers ourselves to species just beginning their own journey toward the sky. The story of human civilization might be far older and stranger than textbooks acknowledge. The gods might have been visitors who came, taught, and departed. The monuments might be messages encoding knowledge for when we developed enough to decode them. Our very consciousness might be gift from beings who saw potential in primitive primates and decided to elevate them toward the stars. Or it might all be natural, evolved, coincidental, and explainable through orthodox science, without requiring any outside intervention. Either way, here we are, conscious, building, reaching toward space, and still looking up at the stars, still wondering what our ancestors wondered, still asking if anyone looks back. Where are you listening from? What time is it as you hear these words? And when you finish listening, will you look up at the night sky differently, wondering if the lights you see are stars or satellites, or perhaps something watching, evaluating, deciding if we're ready for the return ancient prophets promised? The ancient astronauts may have built our civilization, or we may have built it ourselves. But the wondering, the questioning, the searching for answers, that's what makes us human. And perhaps that was the point all along. Dawn breaks across the Pacific, spilling light across continents in sequence. The darkness retreats westward as Earth rotates into day. Monuments emerge from shadow. First Angkor Wat, then the temples of India, then Petra, then the pyramids of Giza, then Stonehenge, then the mounds of North America, then the ruins of Central and South America. The same monuments that stood through last night stand through this morning, as they've stood through countless dawns across millennia. The stones persist while empires rise and fall, while languages emerge and vanish, while certainty gives way to doubt, and doubt occasionally hardens back into certainty. From sufficient altitude, human civilization looks like breath, expanding, contracting, expanding again. Cultures flourish, collapse, and from their ruins, new cultures grow. Knowledge accumulates, gets lost, gets rediscovered. Technologies develop, disappear, re-emerge centuries later as if they were new inventions. The pattern repeats with such regularity that it suggests something more than random chance. Either humanity is remarkably forgetful, doomed to rediscover the same truths repeatedly, or the cycle itself is feature rather than bug, designed rather than accidental. Ancient texts describe these cycles explicitly. Hindu tradition divides time into yugas, great ages of rise and fall spanning hundreds of thousands of years. The Satya Yuga represents peak civilization when gods walk among humans and knowledge is complete. Each successive age sees decline. The Treta Yuga, the Dvapara Yuga, and finally the Kali Yuga we currently inhabit, the age of darkness when divine presence is absent and humanity struggles in ignorance. But the cycle continues. After Kali Yuga comes destruction and rebirth, a new Satya Yuga beginning the pattern again. The Maya described multiple worlds, each destroyed before ours. We live in the fifth world, they said, and like the previous four, it will eventually end in catastrophe. Creation, flourishing, destruction, new creation. The cycle repeating across cosmic spans. Other cultures tell similar stories. The Hopi describe 3 previous worlds destroyed by fire, ice, and water before the current 4th world emerged. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, followed by rebirth and renewal. The pattern appears too frequently across too many cultures to dismiss as coincidental myth-making. What if the cycles are real? Not metaphorical ages, but actual rises and falls of civilization, some so ancient that only monuments survive. The Younger Dryas event around 11,000 BC brought sudden climate change, mass extinctions, and flooding that erased coastlines where most human populations likely concentrated. If advanced civilization existed before that cataclysm, most evidence would be underwater now, drowned beneath oceans that rose over 300 feet as ice sheets melted. Underwater archaeology keeps discovering structures that shouldn't exist. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument shows geometric features suggesting artificial construction, terraces, right angles, straight edges. Off India, near Gujarat, sonar surveys reveal massive structures submerged beneath the sea. Near Cuba, researchers found what appears to be a submerged city with megalithic blocks arranged in urban patterns. Near the Azores, pyramidal structures sit on the ocean floor. Mainstream archaeology disputes most underwater finds, attributing them to natural geological formations or misinterpretation of sonar data. But the disputed sites keep accumulating. If civilization has risen and fallen multiple times, the current rise represents one iteration in much longer sequence. The megalithic monuments we attribute to Bronze Age cultures might actually be remnants from earlier cycles, inherited and repurposed by later peoples who found them already ancient. The sudden appearance of sophisticated knowledge in Sumer, Egypt, and other early civilizations might not be independent invention, but rediscovery or inheritance of fragments from previous high civilizations, now lost beneath waves or buried beneath sediment. This interpretation fits ancient accounts more naturally than orthodox chronology. Egyptian priests told Herodotus and later Solon that their civilization inherited knowledge from earlier epochs, that the temples and monuments were far older than Greek scholars assumed. Sumerian texts describe knowledge granted by the Apkallu, 7 sages who came before the flood. The pattern suggests continuity across cataclysms, knowledge transmitted from previous cycles to subsequent ones through survivors who preserved what they could. Enter the ancient astronauts into this cyclical framework, and the pattern becomes clearer. Perhaps they don't visit once and depart permanently. Perhaps they return periodically, checking on their creation, reseeding civilization after catastrophic collapses, maintaining the experiment across multiple iterations. Each cycle, humanity climbs from primitive to advanced, reaching certain thresholds before either destroying itself through warfare or environmental damage, or being destroyed by natural catastrophes, or being harvested or terminated by the visitors if the cycle is deemed failure. The monuments would serve as markers across cycles. They survive because they're too massive to destroy, too precisely built to misinterpret as natural formations. Future iterations discovering them would know immediately that advanced civilization preceded them. The astronomical alignments, the encoded mathematics, the impossible precision, all communicate across the gap of forgetting, preserving knowledge that this was built by intelligence, by those who understood the cosmos and mastered stone. If we're one iteration among many, the question becomes whether we'll survive this cycle or join the lost civilizations whose ruins puzzle us. We've achieved technological capabilities matching what the hypothetical visitors once held: genetic engineering, nuclear power, artificial intelligence, space travel. But we've paired that technological power with questionable wisdom, building weapons capable of destroying all complex life, damaging environmental systems that support civilization, failing to solve conflicts without violence. The visitors, if they're watching, might be evaluating whether we'll mature past adolescent phase or destroy ourselves like previous iterations. The increase in UAP sightings during nuclear testing and near military installations suggests monitoring of our most dangerous technologies. Are they concerned we're approaching self-destruction? Or are they simply gathering data before deciding whether this iteration succeeds or requires reset. The ancient prophecies of return take on different meaning within cyclical framework. Perhaps return happens at end of each cycle, either to guide survivors through catastrophe and help rebuild, or to reset the experiment entirely if the iteration failed. The floods, the fires, the destructions described in ancient texts might be natural catastrophes the visitors help survivors navigate, preserving knowledge for the next cycle. Or they might be deliberate resets, the visitors determining an iteration went wrong and needs clearing before starting fresh. Unsettling implications, but ones that fit the evidence. The sudden collapses of apparently stable civilizations, the Bronze Age collapse that ended multiple empires simultaneously, the abandonment of sophisticated cities across the ancient world, the loss of technologies that required centuries to redevelop. These might not be random historical accidents, but signs of cycles ending, civilizations reaching terminal points before collapse and reset. Yet within this potentially dark pattern, human achievement still matters. Even if we're one iteration among many, even if the visitors monitor and occasionally reset, the consciousness we possess, the cultures we create, the knowledge we develop, these represent genuine achievement. Children don't achieve less because parents guide them. Species don't achieve less because teachers provided foundations. What we build upon inherited knowledge becomes ours through the building. And perhaps the goal isn't creating perfect civilization, but testing whether consciousness, once seeded, can transcend its origins. Can the created become creators? Can the taught become teachers? Can the engineered species reach the stars themselves and perhaps find new primitive species to uplift in turn? The cycle might be feature rather than bug, each iteration an experiment, testing whether this particular seeding produces species capable of joining galactic community. If so, we're being tested now. Nuclear weapons test whether we'll destroy ourselves or develop wisdom to control our most dangerous tools. Climate change tests whether we'll manage planetary systems responsibly. Artificial intelligence tests whether we'll create successor consciousness wisely or recklessly. Space exploration tests whether we're ready to leave our birth planet and spread beyond single world vulnerability. Each challenge represents threshold that either mature civilizations pass or failed iterations don't survive. The monuments the visitors helped build serve multiple purposes within this framework. They mark seeded worlds, identifying Earth to other spacefaring species as place where civilization was intentionally established. They preserve knowledge across catastrophic cycles, encoding information in the one medium guaranteed to survive. Massive stone precisely arranged. They demonstrate technological capability to any future iteration that discovers them, proving that advanced civilization existed before and can exist again. And they might serve as beacons or messages readable by the visitors themselves when they return, showing how far each iteration progressed before cycle ended. The precision of construction, the astronomical alignments, the encoded mathematics all become messages in bottles thrown across time. We were here. We possess this knowledge. We built according to these principles. We understood the cosmos to this degree. Future iterations, discovering the monuments, receive inheritance from previous cycles, clues about what's possible, hints about what previous attempts achieved before collapse. Where does this leave us, here and now? in what might be the latest iteration of an ancient experiment. We stand at the same crossroads previous iterations likely faced. Technological power without corresponding wisdom, capabilities to destroy or transcend, knowledge to engineer life or create artificial intelligence, but uncertainty about whether we should. Nuclear weapons that could end civilization in hours. Environmental damage that could take centuries to manifest, but decades to become irreversible. Social divisions that threaten cooperation exactly when cooperation becomes most necessary. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, if true, doesn't provide answers about which path we'll choose. It suggests we've been given tools, knowledge, and capabilities by beings who wanted to see if we'd use them wisely. The test isn't whether we can split atoms or sequence genomes. We've proven we can. The test is whether we'll survive having those capabilities. Whether consciousness, once elevated, can transcend its destructive impulses and achieve something beyond mere survival. Whether we'll become worthy successors to teachers who invested time, technology, and perhaps genetic material in elevating us. The monuments stand as both encouragement and warning. They prove that massive achievement is possible, but they also mark civilizations that, despite achieving such precision and knowledge, eventually faded. We've inherited their knowledge encoded in stone. Whether we learn from their apparent failures remains open question. Time moves differently for civilizations than for individuals. A human lifetime spans decades. A civilization's lifetime spans millennia. What feels like crisis to us? Climate change, nuclear proliferation, technological disruption might be normal developmental challenges from the visitor's perspective. If they've seeded thousands of worlds and monitored them across cosmic timescales, human history from primitive to space capable represents eye blink. Our current struggles might be typical adolescent phase, the dangerous period when species gains power before wisdom, when technology outpaces ethics, when capabilities arrive before responsibility. Some species navigate this phase successfully. They mature, develop wisdom matching their power, join the community of starfaring civilizations. Others don't. They destroy themselves through warfare, environmental collapse, or reckless technology development. The survivors might get reseeded and chance to try again in the next cycle. The failures might be abandoned, their worlds left fallow, their monuments remaining as memorials to potentials unfulfilled. Which category we fall into isn't determined yet. The outcome depends on choices we're making now, collectively as species. Whether we'll control nuclear weapons or use them, whether we'll address climate change or let it progress toward collapse, whether we'll develop artificial intelligence that serves humanity or replaces it, whether we'll spread to other planets or remain vulnerable on single world, whether we'll contact whatever other intelligences exist in the cosmos or remain isolated on our pale blue dot. The ancient astronauts, if they exist and monitor, probably won't intervene directly. The test wouldn't be valid if they solved our problems for us. They provided foundations, enhanced intelligence through genetic engineering, knowledge of agriculture, and astronomy and mathematics. Examples of what precision and planning can achieve through the monuments. What we do with those foundations is up to us. Parents eventually have to let children face challenges independently, available for guidance, but not solving every problem. Perhaps that's what the departure represents. Not abandonment, but graduated responsibility. We've taught you what you need to know. The tools are in your hands. Your consciousness is activated. Your civilization is established. Now show us what you'll become. The return might happen when we either succeed or fail definitively enough to warrant evaluation. If we succeed, if we navigate the challenges and mature into star-faring civilization, perhaps the return involves welcome into galactic community, an invitation to join whatever organization of advanced species exists out there, to learn technologies beyond what we've developed, to visit other worlds, perhaps even to seed new primitive species ourselves and become the teachers we once needed. If we fail, if we destroy ourselves or damage our world beyond recovery, perhaps the return involves cleanup and reset. Preserve what's salvageable. Let the planet recover, reseed in a few thousand years with adjusted parameters based on what went wrong this iteration. Try again with lessons learned from our failure. Or perhaps there's no return. Perhaps the visitors moved on long ago to other projects, other worlds. Perhaps the UAP phenomena have prosaic explanations, atmospheric effects, classified human technology, misidentified conventional craft. Perhaps the ancient monuments were built by clever humans whose techniques we've underestimated. Perhaps the myths are pure invention, without historical basis. Perhaps our genetics evolved naturally, through processes we understand imperfectly. Perhaps the pattern is pareidolia, our minds imposing meaning on randomness because we fear being truly alone in the cosmos. Either possibility is staggering. If the ancient astronaut theory is true, we're part of a vast story involving intelligence distributed across the galaxy, civilizations rising and falling, teachers seeding students, consciousness spreading through the cosmos in waves of uplift and development. If the theory is false, we're the lonely miracle. Consciousness emerging once through natural processes on one planet, the universe's only witnesses to itself. Both possibilities invite wonder. Both change everything. What's certain is that we exist. We're conscious. We look up at the stars and wonder about our origins, our purpose, our future. That capacity for wonder might be the real gift, whether granted by aliens who genetically engineered it into us or by natural selection that stumbled upon it through blind processes. The wondering drives us forward. The questioning leads to discovery. The mystery propels exploration. The monuments wait where they've waited for millennia, massive and precise, their builders' names forgotten, but their capabilities undeniable. The myths persist despite changing languages and cultures, preserved through 500 generations because something in them resonates as important. The stars burn as they've burned since before Earth cooled. Indifferent to whether we're alone or connected, whether we're random or designed, whether our origins are natural or artificial. Night falls once more across 5 continents. In Peru, Sacsayhuaman stones locked together in darkness. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid rises silent above Cairo. In Lebanon, Baalbek's Trilithon supports empty temples. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat sprawls across hundreds of acres. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands where it was deliberately buried millennia ago, concealing its secrets from all but the most persistent excavators. The darkness that claimed them at the beginning of this journey claims them again now. The cycle continues. Day follows. Night follows day. Questions precede answers. Precede new questions. Each generation looks up and wonders. Each civilization builds monuments that outlast it. Each iteration of consciousness, whether we're the first or the latest in a long sequence, contributes something to the cosmic story before fading into time. Where are you listening from tonight? What continent, what city, what quiet room where you've let these ideas wash over you while darkness surrounds you, or dawn approaches, or afternoon light filters through windows? The location matters less than the listening, the willingness to entertain possibilities that challenge comfortable certainties, the openness to mystery that refuses to resolve into easy answers. When you finish listening, when you close your eyes to sleep or open them to face the day, you'll carry these questions with you. Not answers. We don't have those. Questions about precision that shouldn't exist, knowledge that shouldn't be possible, patterns that shouldn't appear globally, genetics that shouldn't have evolved so quickly, myths that shouldn't tell identical stories, prophecies that shouldn't predict return unless return was promised by beings who actually intended to fulfill the promise. The ancient astronaut hypothesis remains hypothesis, but it's hypothesis worth considering based on evidence rather than dismissing based on discomfort. The stones are real. The precision is measurable. The knowledge is encoded. The patterns exist. The genetics show signs of acceleration. The myths preserve consistency. The cargo cults demonstrate mechanism. Whether these elements prove ancient aliens seeded human civilization, or simply reveal how much we've underestimated our ancestors, remains open question. But the wondering, the questioning, the willingness to look up and ask whether anything looks back, that's human regardless of whether humanity is natural accident or engineered creation. That's the consciousness we possess, however it arose. That's what drives us toward the stars, whether following in the footsteps of those who came before or blazing trails into cosmic territory no intelligence has explored. Sleep well. Dream of stones and stars and the spaces between civilizations where knowledge waits to be rediscovered or remains forever lost. Dream of teachers from the sky and monuments that outlast empires and questions that echo across millennia without finding answers. Dream of cycles that repeat and species that rise and the possibility that we're not alone, that we've never been alone, that the loneliness we feel looking at the stars is memory of separation from those who made us conscious enough to feel it. And when you wake, look up, because whether the ancient astronauts were real or imagined, whether the visitors watched still or departed permanently, whether the prophecies will be fulfilled or remain empty hopes, the stars remain. They call to our ancestors who built monuments aligned to their positions. They call to us who build rockets to reach them. And they'll call to whoever comes after, in the next cycle, in the next iteration, in the continuance of consciousness reaching outward from planet to planet, from species to species, from question to question, across the infinite dark. The monuments stand. The myths remember. The questions persist. And we, the latest expression of consciousness on this pale blue dot, continue the work of wondering why we're here, where we came from, and what we're meant to become. The ancient astronauts, if they existed, gave us the tools to answer those questions. Whether we use those tools wisely, whether we survive long enough to reach the stars ourselves, and perhaps find them waiting. That story is still being written by us right now. In every choice we make about our trajectory as species, the cycle continues. Dawn breaks, darkness falls, civilizations rise, Knowledge is taught, monuments are built, teachers depart, students grow, questions persist, and somewhere in the vast cosmos perhaps, the next chapter waits to be written. The next cycle prepares to begin. The next species looks up and wonders and takes the first tentative steps toward the stars that call to them as they once called to us. Sweet dreams. May your sleep be deep, your rest be peaceful, and may you wake with wonder intact, ready to look up and ask the questions that drive consciousness forward, whether that consciousness emerged naturally or was granted deliberately by those who came before and might, one day, return to see what we've become. The journey ends where it began, with questions rather than answers. We've traveled from Peru to Egypt, from Lebanon to Easter Island, from myths preserved for millennia to genetic code written in our cells. We've examined stones weighing more than modern cranes can lift, positioned with precision modern engineers struggle to match. We've traced astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist in Bronze Age texts. We've followed myths describing beings from the sky who taught, built, departed, and promised return. We've watched cargo cults form in real time, demonstrating exactly how primitive people respond when advanced technology enters their world. The pattern exists. Denying that requires closing your eyes to evidence carved in stone, written in myths, encoded in genetics, demonstrated through global similarities that coincidence cannot adequately explain. Something happened during humanity's developmental phase. Something elevated us from tool-using primates to civilization-building, stargazing, question-asking beings in an evolutionary eye blink. Whether that something was natural selection operating through mechanisms we don't fully understand, or intervention by beings possessing technology and knowledge beyond what humans of that era should have commanded, remains the central question. But perhaps the answer matters less than the asking. Perhaps the real gift, whether granted by ancient astronauts or by blind evolutionary processes, is the capacity to wonder, to look at 1,650-ton stones and ask how, to examine myths and ask what if, to study our own genetics and ask why so fast, to gaze at the stars and ask, are we alone? The ancient astronaut hypothesis doesn't diminish human achievement if it's true. Children aren't less capable because parents taught them. Students aren't less accomplished because teachers provided foundations. What we've built upon inherited knowledge, whether that knowledge came from our own ancestors through gradual discovery or from visitors who accelerated our development through direct teaching, remains genuine achievement. The art, the philosophy, the science, the technology we've developed over 10,000 years represents human creativity and ingenuity regardless of how the journey began. If the hypothesis is true, if beings from beyond Earth did visit during our species' infancy, then we're not alone in the cosmos. We're part of something larger, connected to intelligence that predates us and perhaps outlasts us. The monuments they help build become messages across time, lessons encoded in stone for when we develop enough to decode them. The knowledge they taught becomes inheritance. We're only beginning to fully understand. The departure becomes temporary absence rather than abandonment, with return promised when we reach developmental stages, making communication meaningful rather than dominating. The implications ripple outward. Religious traditions would need reinterpretation, not abandonment. The gods described in ancient texts might be physical beings rather than metaphysical forces, but spirituality and meaning wouldn't vanish. They'd simply incorporate larger context, that consciousness exists throughout the cosmos, that we're younger siblings in a family of intelligences, that our teachers haven't forgotten us and might return as prophesied. Science would face paradigm shift comparable to heliocentrism or evolution, requiring complete revision of timelines, capabilities, and developmental models. But the scientific method would persist, now with access to potentially encoded information the visitors left in monuments, awaiting our readiness to understand. If the hypothesis is false, if we achieved everything through natural processes without outside help, then we're the universe's lonely miracle. One planet among trillions, where consciousness emerged through blind evolutionary processes, where intelligence developed naturally, where the monuments were built by clever humans whose techniques we've forgotten. The isolation would be profound. We'd be evolution's sole triumph, the cosmos's only witnesses to itself, bearing sole responsibility for consciousness's continued existence. That possibility carries its own kind of weight, its own implications for meaning and purpose. Either way, the wonder remains. We exist. We're conscious. We build, create, question, dream. Whether that consciousness is natural accident or engineered gift, whether we're alone or connected, whether our origins are terrestrial or influenced from beyond, the fact of our existence remains extraordinary. The evidence we've examined doesn't provide definitive proof. It provides pattern suggesting that comfortable orthodoxies might be incomplete, that ancient accounts might preserve more truth than dismissed as mythology, that our ancestors might have been better observers, and humanity might have received more help than current models acknowledge. The pattern invites questions rather than demanding conclusions. It opens doors rather than closing them. It suggests possibilities that challenge comfortable narratives, but that the evidence itself seems to support. What we do with those possibilities depends on intellectual honesty and willingness to follow evidence where it leads, rather than where comfort suggests. Dismissing ancient astronaut theory without examining the evidence means deciding in advance what truth must look like. Accepting it uncritically means substituting new dogma for old. The path between requires holding possibilities lightly, examining evidence carefully, acknowledging what we don't know while remaining open to what we might discover. The monuments will stand whether we believe ancient astronauts helped build them or attribute them entirely to human capability. The stones don't care about our interpretations. They simply are, massive, precise, encoded with knowledge, aligned to the heavens. They wait for us to understand them fully, to decode whatever messages they contain, to recognize them as what they might truly be. Not just tombs or temples, but lessons in stone, teachings from a vanished instructor, foundations laid for students who wouldn't be born for thousands of years. The myths will persist whether we read them as literal history or pure invention. They've survived 500 generations of transmission because something in them resonates as important, worth preserving. Whether that importance is literal truth about actual events or psychological truth about human nature and our relationship to mystery and transcendence, the stories continue speaking to something deep in human consciousness that responds to tales of beings from above who taught, transformed, and departed with promises to return. our genetics will continue revealing surprises, whether natural selection alone accounts for our development, or genetic engineering accelerated the process. The TZIT's chromosome fusion, the FOXP2 gene, the rapid brain expansion, the uniquely human sequences clustered around cognitive development, all exist regardless of interpretation. Whether they represent extraordinary luck through random mutation and selection or deliberate modification by beings possessing biotechnology, the genetic evidence shows humanity's development followed unusual patterns that deserve explanation beyond "it just happened." The cosmos itself remains vast and mostly unexplored, whether we're its only consciousness or one among many. The stars burn regardless of whether anyone watches them, or whether watchers exist on countless worlds. The silence we hear when we listen for signals might be actual silence of empty universe, or it might be noise we don't yet recognize, or it might be deliberate silence from civilizations that observe but don't openly communicate with species at our developmental level. The answer awaits discovery through continued exploration, continued listening, continued reaching beyond our birth world toward whatever truths exist in the darkness between stars. The ancient astronaut hypothesis offers framework for understanding the pattern. It doesn't demand belief, but invites consideration. It suggests that when we look at impossible precision in ancient construction, at global similarities in isolated cultures, at astronomical knowledge requiring technology that didn't exist, at genetic acceleration beyond natural selection's typical pace, at myths describing teachers from the sky, at artwork depicting suited figures and flying craft, at cargo cults demonstrating how contact becomes mythology. When we look at all this together, rather than dismissing each piece separately, we see pattern pointing toward intervention, teaching, deliberate elevation of a species showing promise, but needing help achieving consciousness. Does that diminish us? Or does it connect us to something larger than ourselves? Does it reduce human achievement? Or does it place our achievements within context of cosmic community, where consciousness spreads through teaching and uplift across species and generations? Does it threaten meaning? Or does it suggest meaning extends beyond single planet, single species, single isolated emergence of awareness in otherwise unconscious universe? These questions don't resolve simply. They shouldn't. Mystery serves purpose. The unknown drives exploration. Uncertainty motivates discovery. If we knew definitively that ancient astronauts seeded civilization, or knew definitively they didn't, the question would close. But questions that close stop generating wonder. They become facts to memorize rather than mysteries to explore. Better to remain in the productive uncertainty, the space between knowing and not knowing where curiosity thrives. Better to hold the ancient astronaut hypothesis as possibility worth examining, rather than conclusion requiring defense or threat requiring rejection. Better to let the evidence speak, to remain open to what it might reveal, to follow discoveries wherever they lead. The sun rises again over the monuments. Light touches the Great Pyramid's apex. Shadows retreat from Puma Punku's scattered blocks. Göbekli Tepe emerges from darkness. Easter Island's Moai stand watch as they've stood for centuries. The same monuments that witnessed yesterday's sunset witness today's sunrise. They'll witness tomorrow's and the next day's and the day after that, persisting through countless cycles of light and dark, while humanity continues its journey from ignorance toward understanding. We're somewhere on that journey now, further along than our ancestors who first wondered about the stars. Not as far as we might someday reach if we survive our current challenges and mature into starfaring civilization. The path ahead remains uncertain. We might destroy ourselves through warfare or environmental collapse. We might transcend our origins and reach the stars. We might encounter the visitors returning to evaluate their creation. We might discover we were alone all along and face the responsibility that entails. Or we might find truths stranger than any hypothesis currently entertained, realities that reshape our understanding in ways we can't yet imagine. What's certain is the journey continues. Each generation looks up, wonders, questions, builds upon what previous generations discovered. Knowledge accumulates despite occasional catastrophic losses. Understanding deepens despite errors and false paths. Consciousness persists despite challenges that threaten it. And the monuments, silent witnesses to possibilities we've mostly forgotten, wait patiently for us to remember. Night will fall again across the continents. The darkness that claims the monuments each evening returns tonight, tomorrow, through all the nights ahead, until perhaps the visitors return and the long waiting prophesied in every ancient tradition finally ends. Or perhaps the darkness will continue indefinitely, the monuments enduring through age after age while we remain alone. The cosmos is only witnesses to itself, building our civilizations on foundations we laid ourselves without help from above. Either way, the stones endure, the questions persist, the wonder remains. And we, the conscious beings contemplating our origins, examining evidence carved in stone and written in genes, wondering whether we're creations or accidents, products of design or evolution's blind tinkering. We continue the journey our ancestors began when they first looked up and wondered why the lights in the sky moved. That journey doesn't end with this exploration. It continues through every person who hears these ideas and decides to look deeper, to question more, to examine evidence rather than accepting comfortable certainties. It continues through researchers studying ancient sites with new tools and fresh eyes. It continues through geneticists decoding our history written in DNA. Shah continues through astronomers listening for signals and searching for worlds where consciousness might have emerged. It continues through each moment. Someone stands before ancient stones and lets wonder overcome the easy dismissals, the confident explanations that don't quite fit, the orthodoxies maintained through repetition rather than evidence. The ancient astronaut hypothesis remains hypothesis. The pattern remains pattern. The questions remain questions. But the wondering, the questioning, the willingness to entertain possibilities that challenge comfortable narratives, that's human. That's consciousness at work. That's what might be the real gift, whether granted deliberately by beings who engineered it into us or stumbled upon randomly through natural selection's patient work. So wonder, question, look up at the stars and ask whether anything looks back. Examine the stones and ask how. Read the myths and ask what if. Study the genetics and ask why. Follow the evidence, remain open to mystery, and let the questions drive you forward into discovery. Because whether ancient astronauts seeded human civilization, or we achieved everything ourselves, whether the visitors watch from distant observation posts, or never existed at all, whether prophecies will be fulfilled, or remain empty hopes, the quest for understanding continues. The journey from ignorance toward knowledge persists, and consciousness, that strange phenomenon that emerged on at least this one planet in the vast cosmos, continues asking the questions that define what it means to be aware, to wonder, to seek truth beyond comfortable illusions. The monuments wait where they've waited for millennia. The myths remember what they've preserved through 500 generations. The stars burn as they've burned since before Earth cooled. And we, standing at this particular moment in the long arc of human history, continue the ancient work of wondering why we're here, where we came from, whether we're alone, and what we're meant to become. The answer, when it arrives, might come from the visitors returning as prophesied, or from our own discoveries as we reach the stars. Or it might never arrive, the mystery persisting forever, driving us forward through the infinite dark toward truths that remain always just beyond reach. Until then, the wondering continues, the journey persists, and the questions echo across the space between stones and stars, between past and future, between what we've forgotten and what we might remember, between being taught and becoming teachers ourselves. Sleep now if it's night where you are, or wake if dawn approaches. Either way, you've journeyed through deep questions tonight, traveled from monument to monument, examined evidence that challenges comfortable certainties. Whether you accept the ancient astronaut hypothesis or remain skeptical, whether the pattern compels you or leaves you unconvinced, you've engaged with mystery. You've wondered. You've questioned. That's enough. That's everything. The wondering itself matters more than the conclusions you reach, because wondering leads to searching, searching leads to discovery, and discovery leads onward to new mysteries that drive consciousness forward through the cosmos. One question at a time, one civilization at a time, one species at a time. The cycle that might have created us continues through us. And perhaps that's the point. Not to solve every mystery, but to keep wondering, keep questioning, keep reaching toward the stars that called to our ancestors and call to us and will call to whoever comes next in the endless progression of consciousness, asking why, seeking truth, building monuments that endure, and looking up at the night sky wondering if anyone looks back. The stones endure, the stars burn, the questions echo, and the journey continues from ancient past toward unknown future, from stones to stars, from wondering to knowing, to wondering again at deeper mysteries. That's the human story. That's what we are, whether created by ancient astronauts or shaped by evolution alone, whether part of cosmic community or lonely miracles. We are the beings who wonder, who question, who look up and ask, and who build our civilizations on foundations of mystery, reaching always toward understanding that remains forever tantalizingly beyond complete grasp, driving us onward through the infinite dark toward whatever truth awaits in the space between the stones we've examined tonight and the stars we'll reach tomorrow. Night settles over the Giza Plateau. The desert cools, the air grows still, and the Great Pyramid looms like a frozen wave of stone. Too vast, too precise, too silent to seem entirely man-made. Beneath its shadow, the question that opened this journey returns. Who truly built this? Not just the individual monument, but the pattern it represents, the global network of impossible precision, the sudden emergence of knowledge that shouldn't exist, the consciousness that allowed our species to conceive and construct monuments that outlast empires. We've traveled through evidence scattered across continents and carved into our very cells, from Peru to Easter Island, to Egypt, to Lebanon, to Turkey, from myths preserved through 500 generations to genetic code written in chromosomes, from cargo cults forming in real time to artwork depicting what appears to be ancient contact. Each piece of evidence, examined individually, permits alternative explanations. Together, they form a pattern that resists simple dismissal. The precision stands. Stones weighing over 1,600 tons, positioned with sub-millimeter accuracy. Surfaces flat to within fractions of inches on materials harder than the tools allegedly used to shape them. Astronomical alignments to within arc minutes of true north. Mathematical constants encoded in proportions that shouldn't appear in structures built before those constants were supposedly discovered. The Itates precision doesn't diminish with examination. It intensifies, challenging orthodox explanations until the comfortable narrative of Bronze Age humans with copper tools accomplishing these feats begins to sound less like science and more like faith. The global pattern persists. Identical construction techniques appearing on 6 continents among cultures supposedly isolated from each other. Polygonal masonry in Peru, matching techniques in Easter Island, Indonesia, Japan, and Greece. Astronomical alignments marking the same celestial events everywhere. Mathematical relationships repeated across impossible distances. Pyramid forms rising on every inhabited continent. The statistical improbability of independent invention multiplies with each example until coincidence becomes less believable than shared instruction. The knowledge remains impossible to explain through natural observation alone. Sumerian accounts describing 12 bodies in the solar system. Dogon traditions preserving accurate details about Sirius B invisible to naked eyes. Mayan calculations of Venus accurate to ours over 5 centuries. Precessional knowledge encoded in monuments millennia before its supposed discovery. Ancient understanding of Earth's dimensions, requiring either impossibly sustained observation programs or instruction from sources capable of viewing our planet from perspectives unavailable to ground-based humans. The genetic evidence won't resolve comfortably. Human brain size tripling in evolutionary eye blink without corresponding environmental pressure. Chromosome 2 fusion distinguishing us from all other primates. FOXP2 gene mutating and spreading faster than natural selection typically operates. Uniquely human genetic sequences clustering around brain development. The appearance of anatomically modern humans without the transitional forms gradual evolution predicts. A timeline compressed beyond what natural selection should produce, suggesting either unknown evolutionary mechanisms or deliberate engineering. The myths speak with one voice across cultures that never met. Beings from the sky possessing advanced knowledge, teaching agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, living among humans, often ruling as gods, departing after establishing foundations, ascending to the heavens, promising eventual return. The stories aren't vague poetry, but specific accounts describing teaching relationships, technological demonstrations, genetic creation through mixing divine and earthly elements. When filtered through cargo cult research, showing how primitive people respond to advanced contact, the myths sound less like fantasy and more like cultural memory. The artwork documents something. Suited figures in tassili naja with helmets and apparent breathing apparatus. The Abydos hieroglyphs showing shapes resembling modern vehicles. The Palenque sarcophagus that, without mythological filtering, looks like a pilot operating controls. Dog figurines with goggle-like eyes and elaborate body coverings. Wandjina with large eyes and radiant halos. Dendera reliefs resembling electrical devices. Images that orthodox archaeology dismisses as symbolic art, but that contain technical details suggesting documentation rather than decoration. The cargo cult parallel validates the transmission mechanism. John Frum, forming within years of American military contact, complete with rituals mimicking observed behaviors, elevation of visitors to divine status, prophecies of return. The process documented in real time, showing exactly how actual events become religious mythology within single generations. If it happened in 1942, producing cults persisting 80 years later, it could have happened in 10,000 BC, producing the remarkably consistent myths found globally. Each category of evidence points toward the same conclusion. Something elevated humanity from tool-using primates to civilization-building, question-asking, stargazing beings in a time frame natural processes alone struggle to explain. Either our understanding of natural selection is incomplete, missing mechanisms that allow rapid change under circumstances we don't recognize, or human development received assistance, teaching, engineering, deliberate intervention by beings possessing knowledge and technology beyond what Bronze Age humans should command. The ancient astronaut hypothesis offers the most economical explanation. One assumption that beings with advanced technology visited Earth during our developmental phase accounts for the precision, the global patterns, the impossible knowledge, the genetic anomalies, the consistent myths, the technical artwork, and the prophecies of return. That single hypothesis requires fewer extraordinary coincidences than orthodox explanations, demanding that dozens of separate impossibilities all occurred independently through natural processes we don't understand. Does this prove ancient aliens built human civilization? No. Proof would require artifacts clearly of extraterrestrial origin, biological remains of the visitors, spacecraft that couldn't be explained as human-made, or contemporary accounts explicitly describing extraterrestrial origin in terms that couldn't be misinterpreted. We have none of these. What we have is circumstantial evidence forming a compelling pattern, strong pattern, consistent pattern, but circumstantial nonetheless. The theory remains hypothesis, worth serious consideration rather than dismissal based on discomfort. The implications threaten comfortable narratives about human exceptionalism, about our achievements being entirely our own, about climbing from caves to cities through independent effort alone. Accepting that our civilization might be seeded, our intelligence engineered, our knowledge taught by beings from elsewhere, diminishes the story we tell ourselves about human triumph over nature. Yet accepting doesn't diminish genuine achievement. Our ancestors built upon whatever foundations existed. They created unique civilizations from shared starting points. They developed art, philosophy, science, technology through observation and experimentation. The past 10,000 years of human development represents real achievement, even if the initial spark came through teaching rather than independent discovery. Children aren't less capable because the parents taught them. Civilizations aren't less accomplished because teachers provided foundations. The question isn't whether the hypothesis diminishes us, but whether evidence compels consideration despite discomfort. looking objectively at the pattern, the precision, the knowledge, the global similarities, the genetic timeline, the myths, the artwork, the cargo cult validation, the evidence points toward intervention more economically than toward multiplicative coincidences. That doesn't make intervention certain. It makes it worthy of examination rather than reflexive dismissal. If true, the implications reshape everything. We're not alone. We're part of something larger. Our development might be monitored. The return might be coming. Religious traditions might preserve literal truth about physical beings rather than metaphysical deities. Science would need paradigm shift comparable to heliocentrism or evolution. Philosophy would need to incorporate context that consciousness was granted rather than achieved. That we're younger siblings in a family of intelligences spanning the cosmos. If false, if we achieved everything through natural processes without help, we're the lonely miracle. One planet where consciousness emerged through patient evolution. The monuments were built by humans whose techniques we've forgotten. The myths are pure invention without historical basis. Our genetics evolved naturally. The isolation would be profound, bearing sole responsibility for consciousness's continued existence in a universe that produced awareness only once. Either way, the wonder remains. We exist, we're conscious. We contemplate our origins and question our purpose. Whether that consciousness emerged naturally or was engineered deliberately, whether we're alone or connected, whether our origins are terrestrial or influenced from beyond. The fact of our existence is extraordinary. The monuments will stand, whether we believe ancient astronauts helped build them or attribute them entirely to human capability. The stones don't require our interpretations. They simply are, massive, precise, encoded with knowledge, aligned to the heavens. They wait for us to understand them fully, to decode whatever messages they contain, to recognize them as what they might be. Not just tombs or temples, but lessons preserved for students who wouldn't be born for thousands of years. The myths will persist, whether we read them as history or invention. They've survived 500 generations because something in them resonates as important. Whether that importance is literal truth about actual events or psychological truth about human nature, the stories continue speaking to consciousness in ways that demand preservation. Our genetics will continue revealing surprises, whether evolution alone explains our development or engineering accelerated it. The chromosome fusion, the FOXP2 gene, the rapid brain expansion, the uniquely human sequences all exist regardless of interpretation. Whether extraordinary luck through natural processes or deliberate modification by beings with biotechnology, the genetic evidence shows unusual patterns deserving explanation. The cosmos remains vast, whether we're its only consciousness or one among many. The stars burn indifferent to whether anyone watches. The silence we hear listening for signals might be actual emptiness, or noise we don't recognize, or deliberate silence from civilizations that observe developing species without openly communicating. What's certain is the journey continues. Each generation looks up, wonders, questions, builds upon what previous generations discovered. Knowledge accumulates despite occasional catastrophic losses. Understanding deepens despite errors. Consciousness persists despite challenges. And the monuments, silent witnesses to possibilities we've mostly forgotten, wait patiently for us to remember. Perhaps we're meant to forget and remember cyclically. Perhaps civilizations rise and fall in patterns more regular than random, each iteration testing whether consciousness can transcend its destructive impulses and achieve something beyond survival. Perhaps with the latest iteration in a much longer sequence, building on foundations laid by teachers who came before, and might return to evaluate their creation's progress. Or perhaps we're the first, the only, the lonely pioneers building everything ourselves without help or observation, or any promise of return except what we imagine in hopes of not being alone. Either possibility invites wonder, either suggests we matter, whether to visitors who invested in our development, or to a cosmos that produced consciousness naturally and might never produce it again. The ancient astronaut hypothesis doesn't answer every question. It raises as many as it resolves, but it takes evidence seriously rather than dismissing it as coincidence. It treats our ancestors as accurate observers rather than primitive fantasists. It suggests that impossible precision is impossible only if we assume Bronze Age humans built alone. With help, with teaching, with technology borrowed from those more advanced, the impossible becomes merely difficult. Night falls again over Giza, over Pumapunku, over Göbekli Tepe. The desert cools, the jungle darkens, the plateau settles into shadow. The monuments stand where they've stood for millennia, massive and precise. Their builders' identities lost, but their capabilities undeniable. Above them, stars emerge, the same stars that guided ancient builders when they aligned their monuments, the same stars that call to us as they call to our ancestors. Somewhere in that darkness, perhaps the visitors watch, or perhaps they've moved on to other projects, other worlds, or perhaps they never existed, and the monuments are simply human achievement we've underestimated. Myths are simply stories we've misunderstood, and the pattern is simply coincidence we've overinterpreted. But the stones don't lie. They weigh what they weigh. They're positioned as precisely as measurements confirm. They encode the knowledge that analysis reveals, and they wait, patient and massive, for us to understand what they represent. Tombs, temples, messages, beacons, testaments to human capability, or evidence of teachers from the stars who came, taught, built, and departed, leaving knowledge encoded in stone for when their students developed enough to decode it. The answer may arrive when they return, or when we reach the stars ourselves and find evidence of civilizations older than ours. Or it may remain forever open, driving us forward through mystery toward discovery. Where are you listening from tonight? And at what time does your sky align with theirs? Were we alone when we built these, or did someone show us the way? From space, Earth is a pale blue dot spinning through darkness. The stars don't twinkle here beyond atmosphere. They burn steady, ancient light traveling from distances measured in years and lifetimes and epochs. From this vantage, the monuments we've examined through this journey disappear. The Great Pyramid becomes invisible. Baalbek vanishes. The precision that challenged our understanding, the massive stones that defied explanation, the global patterns that suggested connection, all fade into the larger pattern of a single planet, orbiting an unremarkable star in an average galaxy among countless others. But zoom in. Follow the light back down through atmosphere, through clouds, toward the surface where something extraordinary happened, where consciousness emerged, whether through patient natural processes or deliberate intervention, where beings arose who could wonder about their origins, build structures outlasting empires, preserve stories across millennia, encode knowledge in stone and myth and genetic material, where intelligence developed enough to look back up at the stars and ask the question that might define consciousness itself. Are we alone? The ancient astronaut hypothesis attempts to answer that question, or at least to address the evidence suggesting the answer might be no. Throughout this exploration, we've seen pattern after pattern pointing toward the possibility that our civilization was seeded, our intelligence enhanced, our development guided by beings who came before us and knew how to accelerate the journey from primitive to conscious. The evidence surrounds us, carved in stones too massive to move, written in myths too consistent to dismiss, encoded in genetics showing signs of acceleration, preserved in global similarities too specific for coincidence, documented in artwork too technical for pure symbolism, validated by cargo cults demonstrating how contact becomes mythology. None of it proves ancient aliens definitively. All of it suggests that comfortable orthodoxies about independent human achievement might be incomplete. If the hypothesis is true, we're part of a story vastly larger than textbooks acknowledge. We're one chapter in a narrative spanning galaxies and eons. Consciousness spreading through the cosmos, not randomly, but deliberately. Older species teaching younger ones. Knowledge passed forward through cycles of seeding and development, and eventual maturity. The visitors who might have engineered our cognitive leap from primitive hominids to conscious humans would be doing what successful species perhaps do, ensuring consciousness persists beyond single planets, single civilizations, single iterations of intelligence. The cycle would be feature rather than bug. Seed a promising species with enhanced cognition. Teach the foundations, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, architecture. Help build monuments, demonstrating what precision and planning can achieve. Then depart, allowing the creation to develop independently, returning periodically to monitor progress and evaluate whether the iteration succeeds or requires adjustment. Each civilization that emerges becomes test of whether consciousness, once elevated, can transcend destructive impulses and achieve something beyond mere survival. We're being tested now, if the cycle is real. Our challenges: nuclear weapons, climate change, artificial intelligence, environmental degradation, social fragmentation, might be standard developmental thresholds that every emerging consciousness faces. The dangerous period when technological power exceeds wisdom, when capabilities arrive before responsibility, when species gains ability to destroy itself before achieving maturity necessary to refrain. Some pass this threshold successfully, others don't. The monuments might mark both. Successful civilizations that eventually joined galactic community, and failed ones that collapsed before achieving their potential. Which category we fall into isn't determined. The outcome depends on choices being made now, collectively as species. Whether we'll manage nuclear arsenals or use them. Whether we'll address climate disruption or let it cascade toward collapse. Whether we'll develop artificial intelligence wisely or recklessly. Whether we'll spread to other worlds or remain vulnerable on single planet. Whether we'll mature into wisdom matching our power or remain adolescent species playing with tools that can destroy us. The visitors, if they exist and monitor, are probably watching these choices, not intervening, the test wouldn't be valid if they solved our problems, but observing, evaluating, deciding whether we're ready for whatever comes next. The increase in UAP sightings, as we've developed our most dangerous technologies, suggests monitoring at minimum. Whether that monitoring will culminate in return as ancient prophecies describe, or whether we'll continue developing in isolation, remains to be seen. But perhaps the most important realization isn't whether ancient astronauts created us. Perhaps what matters most is recognizing that consciousness itself, however it arose, carries responsibility. We're aware. We can contemplate consequences of our actions. We can choose paths leading towards survival or extinction. That awareness makes us accountable whether our intelligence was granted by visitors from the stars or emerged through blind evolutionary processes on a planet where chemistry happened to produce self-reflection. The capacity to wonder might be the real gift, whether granted deliberately by beings who engineered it into us or stumbled upon randomly through natural selection's patient work. The ability to look up and ask why defines what we are. That wondering drives us forward. The questioning leads to discovery. The mystery propels exploration beyond what's known toward what might be understood. The ancient texts describe this capacity as the breath of life, the divine spark, the thing that separates humans from animals. Whether we interpret that metaphorically as consciousness arising naturally or literally as genetic modification introducing something new into primate biology, the result is the same. We wonder, we question, we seek, and that seeking has carried us from caves to cities, from fire to fusion, from wondering about stars to visiting them. If we're created rather than merely evolved, the cycle continues through us. The beings who elevated us from primitive to conscious did so perhaps knowing we'd eventually become capable of the same, that we'd reach the stars ourselves, that we'd find other primitive species showing promise, that we'd face the same choice they once faced about whether to help, to teach, to genetically engineer consciousness into beings who might otherwise remain forever unaware, becoming the teachers ourselves, carrying forward the cycle of uplift that created us. That might be the point. Not creating servants or worshippers, but creating fellow seekers, beings who would grow beyond their teachers and perhaps surpass them, adding new perspectives and capabilities to whatever vast community of consciousness exists throughout the cosmos. Each species elevated becomes potential teacher to others, knowledge and consciousness spreading outward in the waves across the galaxy, across time, intelligence ensuring its own persistence through deliberate propagation rather than hoping for random emergence. The monuments encode this possibility. They demonstrate what can be achieved. They preserve knowledge across catastrophic gaps. They mark worlds where consciousness was established. And they might serve as beacons, messages saying, intelligence exists here. Consciousness was seeded successfully. This species is worth evaluating when they develop enough to decode what we've left them. Future iterations discovering them after collapse would know immediately that they're not starting from nothing, that civilization existed before and can exist again, that the knowledge isn't invented but rediscovered. What we build now adds to that legacy, whether as one iteration among many in cyclical rise and fall, or as the continuous development of first and only human civilization. Every monument we construct, every story we preserve, every piece of knowledge we encode, contributes to what future generations will inherit. If we collapse, what survives might become the mysterious, ancient structures that future humans puzzle over, wondering how their ancestors achieved such precision. If we succeed, what we build becomes foundation for even greater achievements, each generation standing on shoulders of previous ones, climbing toward understanding that remains always tantalizingly beyond complete grasp. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, whether true or false, changes how we see ourselves. It suggests we're either part of vast cosmic community or the lonely miracle, either connected to something larger or bearing sole responsibility for consciousness's continued existence. Either recipients of help who might one day provide help ourselves, or independent achievers whose accomplishments belong entirely to human effort and ingenuity. Both possibilities invite wonder. Both suggest we matter. Both indicate that consciousness, wherever and however it emerges, represents something extraordinary worth preserving and propagating. The journey this exploration has traced doesn't end here. It continues through every person who examines the evidence and decides to look deeper, to question more, to follow truth wherever it leads, rather than settling for comfortable certainties. It continues through researchers studying ancient sites with new tools and perspectives. It continues through geneticists decoding our history written in DNA. It continues through astronomers searching for signals and seeking worlds where consciousness might have emerged. It continues through each moment someone stands before ancient stones and lets wonder overcome easy dismissals. The stones themselves don't resolve. They stand as they've stood for millennia, massive and precise. Their builders' names forgotten, but their capabilities undeniable. They don't declare their origins or explain their purpose. They simply demonstrate what was achieved, leaving interpretation to each generation that encounters them. Some see tombs, others see temples, others see messages encoded for future discovery. But what you see depends on what you're willing to consider possible. The myths don't conclude. They persist through continued retelling, each generation preserving stories their ancestors deemed important enough to pass forward. Whether literal history or pure invention, whether memory of actual contact or psychological archetypes, the myths continue speaking to something in human consciousness that responds to tales of beings from above, who taught transformation, then departed with promises to return. The questions don't answer themselves. They wait for us to discover evidence compelling enough to resolve uncertainty, or they remain forever open, driving continued exploration. Are we alone? Were we helped? Will they return? What are we meant to become? The questions propel us forward, whether or not we find answers, whether or not answers exist, whether or not truth matches any hypothesis currently entertained. And we, the conscious beings contemplating our origins on this pale blue dot spinning through darkness, we continue, building on whatever foundations exist, creating meaning from mystery, developing capabilities, approaching what the hypothetical visitors once possessed, facing choices that will determine whether consciousness persists or perishes on this particular world, in this particular epoch. Making decisions now that echo forward through time, determining what future generations will inherit, what stories they'll tell about us, whether they'll honor us as wise ancestors or study us as cautionary example. The cycle that might have created us continues through us, whether we acknowledge it or not. Rise and fall, knowledge gained and lost, civilizations flowering and fading, consciousness persisting through challenges that threaten it, always reaching upward towards something beyond current understanding. Perhaps that reaching is what consciousness does, its essential nature, the thing that defines awareness itself, the capacity to perceive current state and desire something more. The ancient astronauts, if they existed, gave us that capacity, or evolution stumbled upon it through patient trial across millions of years. Either way, here we are, aware, questioning, building, reaching towards stars that call to ancestors and call to us and will call to whoever comes after. The gift of consciousness, however received, comes with responsibility to use it wisely, to ensure it persists, to pass it forward in better condition than we received it. Night falls once more across the Giza Plateau. The desert cools, the air grows still. The Great Pyramid looms like frozen wave of stone, too vast, too precise, too silent to seem entirely human accomplishment. Yet human hands shaped it, whether alone or with help, whether inventing techniques or following instruction. The stones rose. The knowledge was encoded. The monument stands. Above it, stars emerge, the same stars visible to ancient builders who aligned their monument with such impossible precision, the same stars that burn steadily beyond our atmosphere, indifferent to whether consciousness watches them, indifferent to whether we're alone or connected, indifferent to whether our origins are natural or influenced from beyond. But we're not indifferent. We look up and wonder. We examine stones and marvel at precision. We read myths and consider possibilities. We study genetics and question timelines. We stand before mystery and refuse to accept easy answers when evidence suggests complexity. That refusal, that insistence on following truth wherever it leads, that capacity for wonder maintained despite uncertainty. Perhaps that's what consciousness is for. Not to know everything, but to continue asking, continue seeking, continue reaching toward understanding that remains forever tantalizingly beyond complete grasp. The ancient astronaut hypothesis offers one path through the mystery. It doesn't demand belief. It invites consideration. It suggests that when we look at evidence honestly, without prejudging outcomes, the pattern points towards something beyond orthodox explanations. Whether that something is lost terrestrial civilization, extraterrestrial intervention, or natural processes operating through mechanisms we don't yet understand, the mystery remains worth exploring. Where are you listening from tonight? What city? What room? What quiet space where these ideas have washed over you through this long exploration? The location matters because you're part of this story. Your consciousness, your capacity to contemplate these questions, your wonder at mysteries encoded in ancient stones, all these exist, whether granted deliberately or emerged naturally. All these mark you as inheritor of something that began long ago and continues through you toward unknown future. When you finish listening, when you close your eyes to sleep or open them to face whatever comes next, carry the questions forward, not as answers requiring defense, but as mysteries inviting exploration, not as conclusions, but as beginnings of longer journeys toward understanding. And when you look up at the night sky, remember that you're looking at the same stars that guided ancient builders, the same stars that our ancestors gazed upon wondering if they were alone, the same stars that might harbor the visitors if they exist. The same stars will eventually reach ourselves if we survive long enough and grow wise enough to deserve the journey. The monuments endure, the myths remember, the questions echo, the stars burn, and the wandering continues from ancient past toward unknown future. From stones we've examined to stars we'll reach, from questions about whether ancient aliens built human civilization to questions about what we'll build ourselves and whether someday we might become the teachers, carrying consciousness forward through the cosmos, one species at a time, one world at a time, perpetuating the cycle that might have created us. Were we alone when we built these, or did someone show us the way? The stones won't answer, the myths won't resolve, the stars won't speak. But the wondering persists, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. The capacity to look up and ask, to examine and question, to wonder and seek. That's human, whether humanity is natural, accident, or engineered creation. That's consciousness at work. And that consciousness continues forward, building on foundations whatever their origin, reaching towards stars, whatever their distance, seeking truth whatever the cost, driven by wonder that refuses to accept comfortable certainties when mystery beckons. Sleep well, dream deep, and may you wake with wonder intact, ready to look up and continue asking the questions that drive consciousness forward into the infinite unknown. The cycle continues, the journey persists, the story is far from over, and somewhere in the vast cosmos, perhaps, the next chapter waits to be written. The Great Pyramid catches the last light, its apex glowing briefly before darkness claims it entirely. The stones cool as they've cooled through thousands of desert nights, releasing the day's heat into air that grows sharp and clear. Above, stars emerge one by one, ancient light arriving from distances so vast that what we see represents history more than present. Photons that began their journey when these stones were new, or when they were already ancient, depending on which chronology you accept. This journey has traced a pattern scattered across continents and epochs, from Peru to Easter Island, to Egypt, to Lebanon, to Turkey, to Cambodia, from myths preserved through 500 generations, to genetic code written in chromosomes, from cargo cults forming in real time, to artwork depicting what appears to be ancient contact. We've examined stones weighing more than modern cranes can lift, positioned with precision matching aerospace manufacturing. We've traced astronomical knowledge, encoded by people who shouldn't have possessed telescopes. We've followed construction techniques appearing identically across impossible distances. We've studied genetics, showing signs of acceleration beyond natural selection's typical pace. We've read myths, telling the same story worldwide, with consistency suggesting shared experience. The pattern exists. Whether it proves ancient aliens seeded human civilization, or reveals something else. Lost terrestrial civilization, natural processes we don't understand, human capability we've underestimated. The evidence demands explanation beyond comfortable orthodoxies to dismiss anomalies as coincidence. The ancient astronaut hypothesis offers one path through the mystery. Not certainty, not proof, but possibility worth considering, based on evidence rather than rejecting based on discomfort. It suggests that when we look honestly at precision that shouldn't exist, knowledge that shouldn't be possible, patterns that shouldn't appear globally, genetics that shouldn't have evolved so quickly, myths that shouldn't tell identical stories. When we look at all this together, the pattern points toward intervention, teaching, deliberate elevation of a species showing promise, but needing help achieving consciousness. If true, we're part of something larger than human history acknowledges. If false, we're the lonely miracle, consciousness emerging once through patient natural processes. Either way, we matter. Either as creations valuable enough that advanced beings invested in our development, or as improbable triumph of chemistry and time producing something that can contemplate itself. What's certain is that consciousness exists, here, now, in you as you listen to these words in whatever quiet space you've chosen for this journey. The capacity to wonder, to question, to contemplate your own existence and the mysteries encoded in ancient stones. That's real, whether granted deliberately or emerged naturally. That's human. That's what drives us forward from caves to cities, from fire to fusion, from wondering about stars to visiting them. The monuments will stand long after this night fades into the countless nights that follow. The stones don't care whether we believe ancient astronauts helped position them or attribute them entirely to human capability. They simply are, massive, precise, encoded with knowledge, aligned to the heavens. They'll wait as they've waited for millennia, patient witnesses to human speculation, enduring through our debates and theories and gradually accumulating understanding. The myths will persist through continued retelling, preserved because something in them speaks to consciousness in ways that demand preservation. Whether literal history or pure invention, whether memory of actual contact or psychological archetypes, the stories continue echoing across generations, calling to something deep in human nature that responds to tales of beings from above who taught transformation. The stars will burn regardless of whether consciousness watches them, indifferent to our existence, our questions, our fears and hopes. They simply are, ancient light traveling across void, perhaps carrying signals we haven't learned to recognize, perhaps hiding truths we haven't discovered, perhaps watching as we stumble toward answers that our ancestors encoded in stone for when we'd grown wise enough to decode them. And we continue, building on foundations, whatever their origin, creating meaning from mystery, reaching toward understanding that remains always tantalizingly beyond complete grasp. The journey doesn't end with this exploration. It continues through you, through every person who hears these ideas and decides to look deeper, to question more, to follow truth wherever it leads rather than settling for comfortable certainties. The ancient astronauts, if they existed, gave us the capacity to wonder, or evolution stumbled upon it through patient trial across millions of years. Either way, here we are, conscious, aware, questioning our origins and contemplating our future. That capacity, however it arose, defines what we are. So rest now. Let these questions settle into whatever space they'll occupy in your thoughts. You don't need to resolve them tonight. The mysteries have waited thousands of years. They'll wait through your sleep and be there when you wake, if you choose to pursue them further. The stones will stand. The stories will persist. The stars will burn. And the wondering will continue, whether through you or through countless others who look up and ask the questions that might define consciousness itself. Were we alone when we built these? Or did someone show us the way? The answer waits somewhere in the darkness between stones and stars, between what we've forgotten and what we might remember, between past and future, between sleeping and waking. But for now, rest. The journey has been long. The questions have been deep. You've traveled from monument to monument, from myth to myth, from evidence to implication, contemplating possibilities that challenge everything you thought you knew about human origins and our place in the cosmos. Sleep now. Let the wandering fade into dreams. Let consciousness slip into whatever space it occupies during rest. That mysterious realm where awareness continues without direction, where the mind processes all it has absorbed without your active participation. And when you wake, whether hours from now or tomorrow or the next day, you'll carry forward what resonates from this journey. The questions that compelled you, the evidence that challenged you, the possibilities that expanded how you see the ancient world and our place within the cosmic story. The monuments endure in darkness, waiting for dawn's return. The myths rest in the spaces between retelling, preserved in human memory until someone speaks them again. The stars burn steadily through the night, ancient light arriving whether anyone watches or not. And you, the conscious being who has traveled this journey through deep time and deeper questions, you rest now too. Part of the pattern, part of the mystery, part of the story that began when the first human looked up at stars and wondered why they moved, what they were, whether anything looked back. Sweet dreams. May your sleep be deep and your rest complete. And may you wake with wonder intact, ready to look up and continue asking the questions that drive consciousness forward into the infinite unknown. The stones stand, the stories remember, the stars call, and somewhere in the vast cosmos, perhaps, the answer waits. Or perhaps the wondering itself is enough. Perhaps consciousness's gift isn't knowing but seeking, isn't certainty but curiosity, isn't answers but the eternal reaching toward truth that remains forever tantalizingly beyond complete grasp. Sleep well. The cycle continues. The journey persists, and the mystery endures, patient and vast and wondrous, waiting for dawn when the questions begin again. Good night.